Yeah. How about you?
The beanbag belly tutoring.
Oh my God, so much.
Yeah.
I can take a week off after that. You should.
I
should. Yeah. No, we should, I think I have your email address because I wanted to connect with you on a few things. Yeah.
I did ask her.
Yeah, I would love it.
Not here.
Yeah. So much. Very good. You want to interested? After next week.
Hey, how's it going?
I saw those over here, but I have no title.
Yeah, so people up there.
Okay.
Yeah. I have.
For lunch.
I was going there.
Yeah, I know, I was, I think I went to the restaurant.
Because everything's like, remember council, everything is shipped. Good, I'm just gonna have a moderate.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
my time to, shut the door. This is my.
Shy, thank God.
We don't have.
I mean, a lot of people.
Your
Christmas plans
Yeah.
are good.
No, no.
Really?
I have a copy. There's.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially the.
Yeah. I have no idea.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yes.
Love these stickers. That's mine.
Sounds like you're paying for the coffee.
Hi, nice to meet you. I was just telling him I was looking out for you.
Yeah.
How are you doing? Did you get it last night? Were a lot of delays as well. I think nationwide it's a lot.
Yeah. With this China never liked me and they.
Yeah. Where did you fly?
He's in the. I have to think about it. That's what.
Yeah, it's been a mess since that outage. You know,
Eric Johnson.
When I left, we were just like, I got all of the luggage, which I think means the luggage went without even. And now people are saying.
such a nightmare.
They would. Get out.
I'm not into this. I have to choose my day because something came up. So I will.
Hey, we could, but we can say YouTube.
Yeah, we can do that. We'll get there. Likewise. Yeah, so that was my. Biggest dream. I should have played.
I think we've got a couple of.
Yeah.
I might not.
One place, yes, I have very close.
The only last thing to say is.
I know, I do.
That all the things that we were talking about. Anti-abortion.
So it's getting some.
I mean, people want to know, like that. For example, surgery, anti-epileptic.
This is to advance the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Now I just had it.
He's on right track. You're right.
That was.
I'm not.
If you're gonna pay.
Get you a response. ASAP.
People know.
No, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I was just going.
Yeah.
Long night. So no.
I did.
Well, that's primarily.
Test.
Like, I don't want this.
So we work closely.
That's why. I think you already. Where? What is the general?
Yeah, we funded.
Or.
That's why, that's where it's being paid.
We're applying.
It's also.
So.
Here.
All right, welcome, everybody. We're going to go ahead and kick off the afternoon here. Hopefully everyone had a great lunch and is all fueled up for the session that we're about to kick off into. Zach, go ahead and have us go ahead and start. We are about to enter the session, engaging participants as partners in research, data, and its use. Want to welcome all of the panelists here to join me, and I want to give a huge thanks to the organizers for the invitation and the ability to participate today. And most importantly, I actually want to thank all of you for participating today. It's really your voices that we want to hear. We want to listen to what you have to say. We want to learn from you. So my name is Adam Berger. I'm the Director of the Division of Clinical and Healthcare Research Policy in the Office of Science Policy. That's part of the Director's Office here at NIH. In short, I get to oversee all the policies that impact human beings here at the agency. So it's a real pleasure to be with you. I'm going to pass this on since I have no slides. I recognize that you guys don't really want to hear from me. You want to hear from all of them. So I'm going to keep it that way. To answer Walter's earlier question this morning about whether we're paying attention to the great work that's going on here at NINDS around participant engagement, the short answer is absolutely yes. We want to leverage that work. We want to leverage the work of others to be able to meaningfully engage people and communities. We also recognize that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach here, and that engagement is going to need to be tailored to the needs and experiences of both people and communities themselves. So it's critical that we recognize that it truly is research participants that empower the research enterprise here. And that's not only by participating in research, but by allowing us to be stewards of their data, by entrusting us with their data, and by holding us accountable to how that data is used. So we have a great lineup of speakers here today, and they're going to dissect out the intersects between participation in research, benefiting from research, and research participants as equal partners in research and participant data. So our panelists are Shilpa Venkachalam from Creaky Joints, Global Health Living Foundation, and Shilpa, I am sorry for butchering your last name there. Amir Bahmani from Stanford University, Kyle Brothers from University of Illinois School of Medicine, Kareem Watson from all of us. You can read more about them and their bios on the presenters page of the forum site. I personally just don't like to use up the valuable time listening to them and the ability to hear from you by going through them all. So please go look at all of them. They are really impressive folks. In putting their talks together, panelists have considered a number of topics, including connecting the data needs of researchers with the interest, goals, and outcomes of interest of participants. Participants as partners in research, including having an equal voice in what and how data are used for research, establishing and maintaining the connection between participants and researchers, ensuring that the research enterprise is trustworthy so that participants may be willing to trust us with their data, and returning value to participants and ensuring privacy and confidentiality when using participant data in research. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump in, and we're going to start off with Shilpa. And Shilpa, you can either go from there or you can come up here. It's your choice. But they did hand me this, so I need to hand this off. So.
Thank you, Adam. So thank you very much for having me here today. And let me just get these slides sorted so I don't make a blunder. Thank you. So one of our commitments has been, this push to integrate real world data with EHR data, with clinical data, and with lab work. And so that's what I'm here to talk about, which is why I framed this talk as a new era of collaborative research, where we're inviting patients as equal stakeholders to participate in the research process. So what is Patient Spot, right? We are a patient-powered digital platform. We're an omni-disease platform. We serve patients living with all forms of chronic diseases. The platform itself functions as a research registry as well. And so we're able to collect patient-generated data to do comparative effectiveness research, safety research, efficacy research, right? Now, alongside this, we place a heavy importance in sharing back that research, in sharing back that data with the community, most importantly, in the ways that they want it, right? So there is no point in disseminating data, no point in disseminating research if end users, in this case, patients, are not able to use them to make informed medical decisions. And so our push is always to curate information in a way that patients are able to then use it at point of care. So, the registry itself was set up in 2015 with initial support by the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. These were set up as a collaboration or a conglomeration of what we call patient-powered research networks. I'm a patient myself. I live with rheumatoid arthritis. I am the principal investigator of this registry. And part of the reason we set this up is to bring patients into the research process, to have a very active voice, to amplify their voice alongside clinicians and healthcare stakeholders. So the way we set it up was through a collaboration in terms of, and when I say set it up, I mean, everything from design to interface to what kind of data should be collected to what our consent form needs to look like so that patients are not intimidated by consent forms. To explain in the consent form what happens to your data when you supply that data, who sees your data, how long is the data stored, what happens after 3 or 4 years when you provide that data, and what kind of retrospective analysis are we allowed to do with the permission of the patient community. And so this became a hub for patient-centric resources as well. Most importantly, to share, I'll say one of the most interesting things about collecting patient-reported outcomes research data is it serves as a needs assessment. So when we see that patients are completing assessments about fatigue, about things that cannot be seen on your blood work, pain, for example, right? The real world experience, we know what kind of information to share back. So this kind of, constant sort of give and take between researchers, between clinicians, right? And the patient community is pivotal for us to be able to share back what the community needs, and thereby to constantly engage and motivate participation by the community in research. So the infrastructure itself, the registry infrastructure itself is so set up that we're able to make very rapid changes and customize it as per the needs of researchers. We partner with academic institutions, with institutions like the NIH, with PCORI, with FDA. We've been doing a lot of work with them. We're able to also link to external data systems, health system EHRs, claims data. We're able to collect passive data through biosensors, so smartwatches, for example, and then we're able to triangulate all that data with clinical data, with PROs, et cetera. So these are all novel data collection techniques that we've been engaged in. I'm going to talk a little bit about our data collection and app functionality. I'll show you a few screenshots because one of the things we found from engaging with our patients and our patient advisory boards is what the app interface looks like matters a lot to patients, right? So we want to make the app useful to patients, easy to use, and not intimidating to them. Now, we've spoken to patients over the years. One of the things they've said to us is that the traditional paradigms of research seem very daunting to them, right? 10 pages of consent, fine print that they don't even read, that they don't even understand, they don't really care about. I mean, they're already living with a chronic disease. So how do we make research more accessible and interesting to them? So one of the things we do is when we invite patients to join the research registry and the platform is we collect basic demographics with their consent, of course. We ask for their date of birth, their sex, their ethnicity, insurance status. We also ask for their doctor's names, where they reside, what state they reside in, their medications, etc. And because this is all self-reported, it's an important way for us to triangulate and validate the data, right? To validate their diagnosis. So we also collect medication data. We follow the RX norm ontology. And so patients are able to enter what medication they're taking, the frequency at which they're taking it, the dosage at which they're taking it, why they stop or pause a medication. Often chronic disease patients will pause medications, sometimes just because, sometimes because of an infection, etc. And if they switch to a new medication. I'll talk a little bit about this in a later slide, where there's a clinical use component here where clinicians are able to use our app now for remote therapeutic monitoring. So when patients switch a medication, they're able to overlap that and overlay that, track their symptoms fatigue, sleep disturbance, physical function, and see how they're doing when they start a new medication. This information is, of course, very important to the clinician as well, who is then able to get direct reports from the patient and combine that with lab results. Now, this becomes very important in chronic diseases where there are ebbs and flows. For example, in rheumatic conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, we see a rheumatologist once every 3 months, sometimes once every 6 months. And so that interim period to collect the data becomes really important to understand how the patient is living with the disease. So this is what the dashboard looks like. It generates user-generated reports. So when patients pick and choose, they're able to pick and choose what symptoms they want to track. Once they track over a period of time, they're able to see how they're doing over a 7-day period, sometimes over a 30-day period, sometimes over a 90-day period. The app also generates an automatic report. A lot of chronic disease patients will tell us that a lot of their symptoms are invisible symptoms. They don't show up on a lab result. They don't show up in blood work. They don't show up in imaging. And so they're able to share this information then back with their doctor to make any kinds of adjustments in their treatment. So during onboarding, users are also prompted and encouraged to select which PROs they want to choose from. The patient-reported outcomes instruments that were actually devised by the NIH are very important for the chronic disease population, as I've said. But we also want to get patients to use them in the right way. So different chronic disease cohorts will pick different assessments to perform. And we provide some guidance on what might be the right assessments for, say, someone living with ankylosing spondylitis versus migraines. Again, here is just a visual of how the assessments appear. They're performed one at a time in a stream of single question response measures so that patients don't feel inundated with too many questions. They're adaptive questions. So for example, if someone says they can't walk 3 miles, the next question is not going to be, can you walk 10 miles? So we're responding again to whatever the patient is answering. And so it feels like a very customized approach to gather the data. It feels like it's uniquely created for the specific patient. In terms of treatment, we are able to add new treatments depending on your condition. Patients track their medications, they can change their medications, they can even set up reminders in the app to take their medications. Now, what do we do with all this data, right? We're collecting the data, we're the research community, we're the clinicians, we're the healthcare stakeholders. There's no point in us just hoarding all that data. And so we want to share back that data. And so we use data constantly in the organization to analyze it. So we have a data analytics team that is constantly looking at the data every day and thereby creating very, very targeted emails. And I shouldn't use the word targeted, sorry, but very, very specific emails, very specific educational content, so that someone who's dealing with sleep disturbance doesn't get information about fatigue. They get information about sleep disturbance, sleep hygiene, how to get better sleep, etc. So we're able to do that within the entire community. And we have within the registry more than 50,000 patients consented. But outside of the registry, for patients just using the platform, we have, I'm now forgetting the numbers, but it's a huge number. I have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to skip some of these slides. I'll say that we are able to customize our study workflows. We're doing a study with NIH on steroid use and common infections. So we're able to change the skin of the app so that patients are able to participate based on inclusion-exclusion criteria. We don't just ask all patients to participate in the studies. And then finally, I want to bring us to, some of the studies that we've done. Sorry for skipping some of these slides very quickly. But one of the things we've done is we're able to train patients online on how to perform, for example, joint exams on their own at home. So telehealth is something that is gaining a lot of importance with chronic disease populations. And so we're able to allow clinicians to conduct joint exams, for example, at home. We are also able to track, we did studies, to gather real world evidence where we wanted patients to pick and choose based on their disease, what symptoms were important to them, and then share back that data with their doctors and with their communities. And so this was presented at the American College of Rheumatology. Likewise, we did a study that was collecting biosensor data, so passive data through a smartwatch, which we then triangulated. So, patients often experience flares, and during flares, they may have high levels of fatigue, they may not move very much. And so their watch is collecting the data about their steps and their movement. We're then able to match that with what patients are telling us about their levels of fatigue, what their blood work is showing. And so by doing this, what we're really getting is an understanding of the person, not the patient, which is what patients really want today, to understand the person as a whole, not just the patient. And so again, this is some of the data that was presented at the American College of Rheumatology as well, and at the EULAR convention, which is the European League Against Rheumatology. We found there was a large percentage of adherence to passive data collection triangulated with other forms of data. And then finally, we also have the ability to use the app for remote monitoring. Clinicians are able to collect and monitor their patients when they're not seeing them, and then triage them according to the need at that given moment. We also collect unstructured data where patients are able to make notes in their symptom journal, what we call symptom journal, and sort of combine that as well, those notes as well, for a better understanding of the patient's life. So all in all, these are just some of the different pieces of data that we've been working on bringing together. It's attitudinal data, how do they perceive injections versus oral medications, or route of administration, camera data for people with skin lesions, for example, biosensor data with smartwatches, medication-related data. Are they adhering to their medications? Why are they not doing well? Why are they being suboptimally treated? And then, of course, home and work productivity data as well. How is their chronic disease impacting their work life and their home life? And then safety data. So what we're engaging in here is triangulation of these different pieces of data to get a bigger understanding, a whole picture of the entire patient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shilpa. We're going to hold questions at the end, but Amir is next.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Okay, great. Amir Bamani. My background is computer science, and my talk is going to be a bit different. It's going to be from the perspective of an engineer. And out of a tragedy in 2014, I lost my wife to cancer, and I ended up working in School of Medicine. So I'm going to talk about, again, a little bit more about, the gap that we have, in terms of between engineering and School of Medicine. By the way, I reached here last night from Dubai. So if I sleep, during my presentation, please wake me up. So, yeah, I want to start my presentation with this slide that, let's assume that you want to help me to move from point A to point Z, and we have different ways to get there. And in order to tell me which way is the quickest way, there are different layers of information here, right? So if I remove the traffic layer, then whatever you are going to recommend is going to be a guesstimate, right? Because you don't have access to all the layers of information. Similarly, when we're talking about human health, our health is a combination of multiple factors. Our gut bacteria, microbiome, we're talking about DNA, RNA, protein, our genes, and our lifestyle and our diet, right? Combination of these three major factors create all the small molecules in our body. Now, if you're a physician, you're a clinician, and you want to help someone to move from a disease state to a healthy state, or you want to keep them in a healthy state, then you got to get access to these layers of information, right? So we need data, right? We're moving away from hunch-based or guess-based medicine to data-driven medicine. But as we are moving away from that, we're collecting a lot of data, then your cost function rapidly changes toward computation and storage. So we collected over 2 petabytes of data around one individual, former chair of genetics at Stanford, Mike Snyder. If you want to store 1 petabyte of data on any major cloud provider today, it's going to cost you roughly around $20,000 per month. clearly we need better computation and storage systems, right? When we talk about deep data, multimodal data, we have a bunch of needs and challenges. The first, is around data acquisition, right? We have different sources. We want to collect data from those sources. Then we have data storage. Different layers of storage are important. Data distribution is important. Different cities, continents, countries, different regulations. And finally, data analysis, which is around AI ML. But you have to deal at least with three major factors. The number one is scalability to me, sustainability is extremely important. Previously, if you wanted to publish in a high-profile journal, let's say 15 years ago, probably you could, collect like 10 patients' data, but then, you would have a kind of a chance, to get there. But today you have to show that your solution works for a large number of participants. So scalability is extremely important. We got to design latency-sensitive applications like Instagram, Twitter, right? Still call it Twitter. And, it has to be very user-friendly, like the app my colleague showed you. The second part is around interoperability. And if your solution works, for instance, for Apple Watch, it has to work for Fitbit because these are intertwined, right? And the third piece is around security and privacy, which is the foundation of any medical application. But the biggest problem, as I mentioned, I believe is the gap between engineering departments and other schools and with the School of Medicine. We need more designers, more engineers today in the School of Medicine. But there is a barrier, right? So I'll talk about that in a second. I want to start with this research example here around wearable devices, and they're very helpful. They're helping you to collect heart rate variability, a lot of important information. And this is an example that I want to talk about it around detecting infectious disease. Commercial flights, they have different phases, right? So we have climbing, cruising altitude, which is around 30 to 40,000 feet. And as we go high, the air pressure drops. FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, set the cabin pressure to 8,000 feet. So it is, like, for instance, it's between 6,000 to 8,000 feet, the cabin pressure. And let's say you are flying from here to Dubai, 13 hours, and you will have some sort of mildly hypoxic conditions, right? And so Mike Snyder did something really cool in 2016, and he started using pulse oximeter during different phases of flight. And he observed that his blood oxygen level drops a bit, as we are expecting, right? Because the cabin pressure is, it's at 8,000 feet, which is half of Mountain Kilimanjaro. So he did something really cool. He created a green zone around himself, right? Created a kind of a baseline. He found that every time that he's flying, he's going to expect something like this. But once he was flying from Frankfurt to Oslo, and he was like, what is going on? Why there's such a big shift? He didn't have any symptom, pre-symptomatic. A day after that, he developed fever. And he realized 2 weeks before this, he was in Massachusetts helping his brother to put up a fence, and he was bitten by a tick. This is a Lyme disease, right? Lyme infection. 3 days after that, he had a heated conversation with a physician, and he convinced the physician to prescribe doxycycline. And you can see that bounce back to normal after that. I met him in 2017, and he was like, Amir, we need to collect thousands of participants' data. So let's create a platform that we can do that. And we built My PhD Personal Health Dashboard that right now we have over 10,000 participants and 37 studies running on it. We use this platform during the COVID-19, and we built multiple algorithms, and it uses a shared privacy model. So we de-identify, we tokenize the data and keep the sensitive data at the phone level. We shift data randomly for every participant, we encrypt it, send it to the backend, run the algorithm, and we again encrypt the results and send it back to the phone and decrypt it, re-identify it, and present it to the participant. Now, I don't want to go through all this detail here, but there are two things that are super important here. One is about the power of multidisciplinary collaboration. The graph you see on the right side is called DFA, deterministic finite automata, that we as computer scientists, we use this in compiler design. So what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of cool concepts outside of School of Medicine, right? That we can bring those to a School of Medicine to solve some problems efficiently. But again, there's an education piece that, I'll talk about it in a second. The second piece here is that this algorithm is not perfect. The sensitivity is 80%, right? So it cannot distinguish between flu versus, for instance, COVID-19. However, there is an equilibrium between affordability and sensitivity and accuracy, right? So you could definitely add more data types to the watch, but as you are adding more sensors, then your watch is going to be very expensive. And who is going to get hurt? The underserved community, right? So what I think, here is that we need to go with some sort of like a smart data collection ways, in a way that simple solutions like this could help us to detect some of these, issues at early stage. And then the clinicians and physicians would be able to follow up and help the patient and collect, more data types. So the other thing that I want to bring up is around precision education. And like I said, I believe in order to deliver precision medicine, we need to work on precision education, personalized education. 2020, we published this paper in Nature Biomedical Engineering, and the paper got access over 100,000 times in the first couple of months. At the bottom of the paper, these Nature papers, as you know, there are two sections, data availability and code availability. And people had to go ahead and download the data set. They may not even have enough storage. They have to configure the code, install a lot of libraries, and they may not even have the computing power. Especially underserved communities are getting impacted by this. So we came up with this idea of a cloud-based platform that with one click, everything is containerized. You can get access to the code and data. Then I built 9 modules around this and started teaching at Stanford. My students are from computer science, engineering, physicians, pretty much a very diverse background. But then I realized something is still missing. When we talk about the field of precision medicine, or let's say data-driven medicine, we are dealing with at least 3 major buckets. One bucket is around data, that clinicians, physicians are very good in that. One bucket is around probabilities and distributions, that statisticians are very good in that. And one bucket is around technology, that computer scientists, engineers are very good in that. So if you start from the research paper and combine all these topics together, then it's going to be pretty overwhelming for people who are coming from different disciplines. So we came up with a network and modular platform that right now we created 2 courses online that we are offering to students. And I'm very honored we have over 700 underserved students on our platform that they are getting certificate for free from all 50 states and 42 countries. And the last thing that I want to bring up, the last 2 slides, is you can see that this is a pretty complex field, right? It's very multidisciplinary. Now the question is, can non-technical participants also learn about their data? And speaking of large language models, we think this technology could definitely help a lot. And of course, with a proper implementation, with a set of guardrails, make it user-friendly, guided tutorials, and interactive platform, this is what we did. We built something that it's a AI visualization tool that participants or learners, let's say here, they can bring their own data. In this case, the learner brought their own CSV file around heart rate. And then we summarize this for every column, minimum, maximum, average, and send it to a large language model. Ask large language model to give us some goals to visualize this data set. And then once the participants select that, it will generate a code completely, right? No programming here. And our system will run the code and give them this plot here. So you see that, there's a lot here being, handled, and of course, it's a research in progress. But such technologies can be very helpful, especially like for, different languages we can use and other areas that we can customize it based on user preferences. But there are also privacy concerns here. We have tested like multiple different ways, like we are talking about sharing data summaries instead of sharing raw data. We can go with the data summaries and reduce the risk of re-identification. The other thing is around only a shared privacy model, keeps sensitive data at the phone level, or even run large language model on the phone. And the other one is around secure cloud deployment. GPT-4 is available on Azure, and you can run it on Microsoft Azure in a secure environment. Also, Cloud 3 and 3.5 available on AWS Bedrock. So again, you could control your data. And the last piece is around privacy agreements, that it ensures that agreement between the participants and data for model training. So we can ask the company to not train it like OpenAI, for instance. These are definitely, they're several models here, but we should definitely provide a range of options to our participants and give them these, transparency to choose the model that works best for them. The last thing that I want to say is around beyond code or empowering problem solving. And this is a figure from our COVID-19 Nature Medicine paper. And this is just a prompt that it's like magic. We were able to, with one prompt, generate this plot that would take you hours to figure it out, right? So I think, we are kind of entering a new phase. I would call it algorithmic thinking, in a way that we need to work, instead of dealing with debugging, installing libraries, that kind of things that are not very, super valuable in terms of our time, work more toward problem solving and breaking down a problem into a set of logical steps, and teach learners and participants and empower researchers to be able to do this kind of analysis. Yeah, this is my presentation and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Amir. Certainly no code programming certainly democratizes access to these technologies. Next up is going to be Kyle Brothers.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Also very glad to be here, and especially after we saw each other's slides beforehand, but after hearing you all talk, I'm especially excited to kind of fit all this together into one panel. So I'm going to be talking about return of individual research results, and to start basically with the definition. This is the idea that research teams are collecting data from research participants, and then some of that looks like a result of some sort. Some of it might be very similar to a healthcare related diagnostic test or something like that. And the idea is about returning that information collected in the course of research or generated through the research to the individual participant from which that data came. So just kind of drawing some distinctions here. There's been talk for a long time about return of aggregate research results. Could be done through sort of a newsletter framework where you're communicating back with participants about this is what the research is doing, this is what we're finding. That's a different kind of thing from giving people their own research results. There's an idea of return of value, which is sort of like a bigger concept than return of results. I think this came from all of us. I think that's where the idea came about to think about this. This is really saying, yeah, we can help folks out by giving them their research results, but there may be other ways to sort of make participating in research valuable to individuals. And so this is just the kind of the broader concept. And then this is distinguished from disclosing clinical results directly to, in that case, patients. Which is required under the 21st Century Cures Act. And as you all probably have personally experienced, there's MyChart, you can see your results. A lot of laboratories have their own portals where patients can go and look at their results. It's a slightly different thing. And from a policy perspective, a very different thing to return a person's clinical results to them versus their research results. Okay, so with those kinds of concepts in mind, let's move on to talking about this. Why would researchers want to disclose research results to the participants from whom that data came? So one is sort of an instrumental value to research. That is that people are more willing to participate in research when they derive some sort of value from it, right? But there's also an inherent value to doing this. It's sort of demonstrating the virtues of transparency and reciprocity, which is sort of makes a research team or research organization worthy of participants' trust, right? And then, of course, there is, researchers are generally doing research because they want to help people. And so this is creating sort of a shorter term way to help participants, even though the research is also focused on sort of societal benefit in the longer term. Okay, so for like 15 years in bioethics, I've been attending lectures where there's sort of debates over whether or not we should be doing this. I think the debate is effectively over. There is no longer a question about whether we should disclose individual research results to participants. But really the question is how to do this. And the goal is to do it in a way that maximizes benefits to participants and preserves the scientific mission of the research, which are not always in conflict with one another. Sometimes the science does better when there's more openness, right? We kind of, the whole day's been about that. But you do have to weigh sort of, if we're spending a lot of time on this, are we also doing the other thing, the science of coming up with better understanding of disease and hopefully benefiting society in the long term, right? So there can be a trade-off. Okay, so I'm just going to go through a few sort of general challenges with doing this from the perspective of researchers. And then we'll kind of talk about some solutions that I think go back to that question of how should this be done. So, you know, there is an approach to return of results which basically says, yeah, I'll send you a data file, right? Or something like that. Here's an Excel spreadsheet. That is not that helpful, right? That very few of us are capable of analyzing that data. I worked in genetics for over a decade, but if you sent me an Excel spreadsheet with my genetic results, I would have no idea what to do with it, right? So really results with no context have very limited value to participants. And even though there has been debates in bioethics about whether we might scare people and create harms, I don't think major harms are an issue, but there are sort of low-grade harms like annoyance, uncertainty, mistaken conclusions that folks could get from getting data with no context around it. So really researchers need ways to give information, the context, to help it be useful to participants, ideally tailored to an individual's results. So not just, you know, high is bad, low is good, but sort of your result was high and that is bad, right? Sort of tailoring it specifically to the person's result. Okay, the next one is analytical validity. Keep in mind when you're doing research, the labs that do that versus the clinical labs that do diagnostic testing and other kinds of clinical testing, they're there for different reasons. They have different goals, and they often operate in ways that are subtly different, right? So in a research lab, you might have a tray with a bunch of vials there, but you would never do that in a clinical lab because you have to be very careful about the handling and transfer of those materials from one place to the next. So there's all of these like very subtle ways that when you generate data through research, you might sort of create problems where that's actually not that participant's results, right? Or you might calibrate devices with a different degree of specificity or frequency. So generally speaking, there are these sort of analytical challenges of making sure if we are going to be giving results to people that sort of looks like a clinical piece of information, to make sure it meets the general standards that are expected for clinical purposes. And there's actually, this is a widely debated issue still, but there's clearly a role here for thinking about the way CLIA, which is sort of regulation that makes sure that when a patient gets results, they're going to guide their care, that is in fact their result and that it was generated in a technically correct way. There are ways to think about return of research results where they actually are subject to CLIA, right? It's really a matter of thinking about, are we returning these results for the purpose of providing information for diagnosis, prevention, or treatment? If we're not returning results for that purpose, what is the purpose, right? So you will see folks who say, no, you don't need to follow CLIA in this context. And many folks say, well, people are going to go take actions based on this, so that sure seems like CLIA applies. Okay, clinical validity. So the relevance of findings to human health exists on a spectrum, right? So there are things that research could generate that look a lot like a clinical test, right? We know this is valid and useful in a clinical context to answer or guide clinical care. And there is a sort of evidentiary basis for making those conclusions. But there's a lot of information that's sort of relevant to our health. It's interesting, but it's not clear exactly what it means for a person's health. So I picked out just kind of a random example, microplastics, right? See a lot of discussion in the media about microplastics are everywhere. We all have microplastics in our tissues. What's the relevance of that to human health? Surprisingly little is known about that, right? So if I was participating in a research study and the investigators told me, hey, you've got a high level of microplastics, I don't know what that means. I don't know what I should do. So thinking about how these results have sort of what we would call clinical validity is really a key issue. Okay, actionability is another key challenge in disclosing research results to folks. So we know some results are analytically and clinically valid, but there's no known actions that can be taken to prevent or mitigate outcomes. So great example of this is certain genetic variants that we know that's a real thing. We know it is associated with risk for disease. Is there anything an individual could do in response to that to decrease their risk? That might be quite unclear. That's not to say that these kinds of things can't be returned to folks, but really thinking about what is the context we're going to put around that for folks so they understand what that means is really critical, especially when you think about, if you gave me a result that I'm at risk for a particular genetic condition, I might go out and change things in my life that sort of carry their own sets of risks. And so maybe that was a bad idea for me to do that. It's not going to help me any, right? So thinking about when we're disclosing results to folks, is this actionable? Are we sure that's going to help? How can we help folks think through that? Okay. And finally, access is a key issue. So research participants may get results that say, hey, you're at risk for X. It's a technically valid result. We know it's relevant to your health, and we know there are actions that can be taken in response to this that would improve your health or decrease your risk. But maybe the participant doesn't actually have access to those things that need to be done. So I'm at risk for developing a neurological condition. I need an MRI. Well, maybe I'm uninsured. I can't get an MRI. So I think any effort to disclose research results to individuals really needs to take into account the idea that there are things that could be done, but I don't know if people are actually going to benefit from that. And arguably, research studies do have some amount of responsibility to do some things to help with access. So that's a whole debate in itself about what is sort of, we call this ancillary care that goes along with being in research. That is the responsibility of the research study. But it's at least access to someone who can explain the results seems like a key thing to make directly accessible through the research study. And, if the results are sort of not done in a CLIA way, or they have sort of technical validity that's not at the standard that's used for clinical care, maybe you need confirmatory testing that's made available through the research study. Okay. So let's talk about some solutions. Again, getting back to that, how should this be done? I think it's really key to think about how we can really demonstrate transparency and reciprocity while making some results more visible than others, right? So we're sort of acknowledging the right of participants to have access to information about themselves, but that doesn't mean we're sort of putting information right into people's faces that is unuseful, right? We're trying to highlight, this is the stuff that seems most useful, this is the stuff that's less useful, and we're trying to create process around that, right? To bring visibility to the most useful results. So, you can use tools like a web page or an app, or you can incorporate these results into something like an EHR's MyChart. You can provide it with context and explanation tailored to the participants' results, as I was saying, and you can even push notifications to folks. Hey, want you to know there's something here we think is useful to you, right? So you could do that for the most valid and useful results, and sort of not do that for the things that are less important. So I just wanted to give you 2 examples of groups that have done interesting things around making research results available to participants in a way that maximizes their use to folks. So the first one is the Emerge Network. They're currently basically doing genetic testing on research participants. They're calculating a polygenic risk score. And then they're sort of providing that back to participants along with estimates of their risk based on family history and other kinds of relevant pieces of information. And they're kind of assembling that into a general sort of report about risk for whatever condition. Derby comes from a slightly different perspective from the environmental exposures. And this is basically an app designed to make it possible for participants who participated in research that measuring environmental exposures, maybe, industrial, pollutants, et cetera, to give folks like, hey, we measured, X pollutant in your neighborhood, and this is the result, and this is the context around it. So similar kinds of challenges, but different kinds of information. Okay, so then we think about these results that have less validity, less relevance to the participants, but folks will want that sometimes. So you could make that available for those who want a deeper dive, maybe even by making it request only, sort of, this is the stuff we want to make sure you have. If you want anything else, let us know. We'll send it to you, right? This can be a challenge in a number of ways there because of this CLIA compliance question. There are research organizations who will say, no, you can't give that to participants. Their lawyers will say that, right? Because, sounds good, you're not following CLIA. So yeah, and these results can be very numerous. So giving the necessary context can be a challenge. Okay, and then just, this is going to be my last slide, I think. There are some results that folks will not want to look at, right? Maybe someone who has a family history of Alzheimer's specifically is not ready to look at that information and doesn't want to get it. So building in a way for folks to sort of control what information they see is critically important, I think. Okay, and we can discuss these issues in question and answer. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. Much appreciated. Lots to dissect for return of research results, and I promise we will get into it. Our last speaker is Kareem Watson from All of Us Research Program.
Thank you all so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited to talk about this and engaging participants as partners. Prior to joining the NIH, I spent 17 years at the University of Illinois at Chicago at UIC as a cancer disparities researcher, trained in community-based participatory research, CPPR. And so I also was a faculty member in the School of Public Health. And I often tell my students when I'm teaching community engagement, there's two important measures you need to know about teaching community engagement. I said, as a faculty member and as a community engaged researcher within the academy, there's a power dynamic of inequity. I said, so one, you have to develop this thick skin because there's going to be some pushback from the community. And I would tell my students, if you don't get pushback from the community, you're probably not doing community engaged research right. Because in order to get that pushback, you have to create space for that feedback to happen. So I just want to ground this in that work. And also I'm reminded about the concept of knowledge dissemination and how we get this information back. And I learned from some citizen scientists that I was engaging, a group of barbers on the south side of Chicago that said, and I was so excited to include them as authors on a publication. It was like, that's great that you're including us as authors, but how are you going to get this information back to the community members? And so it was their idea to go back to the places where we collected the data and go back and return that same information. So we went back to the churches where we collected information and recruited and engaged those men. We went back to the barbershops. We went back to several places to return that information through this concept called knowledge mobilization. I'm going to talk about that all, but I want to ground it in that because that's something that I learned from my participants who are my partners. So the All of Us Research Program, I'm very fortunate to be the Chief Engagement Officer for the All of Us Research Program. But prior to joining as the Chief Engagement Officer, I was actually one of the co-investigators for the program. So I had the privilege of going around the country for about 2 years, engaging with what we called engagement studios. And these engagement studios had over 300 participants that, they weren't participants at the time, but 300 community members that lent their voice to tell us how they wanted to see the nation's largest genomic study conducted and developed and informed. And one of the things we heard was that we have to think about access. We have to think about location differently. We We have to think about moving away from the ivory tower where research is conducted, knowing that most research, particularly clinical trials, are conducted in academic medical centers. So the community member said, we need to see this research conducted in our communities. So we partnered with federally qualified health centers as a result. So prior to the launching and enrolling of our first participants, we actually engaged a group of FQHCs. Why? Because we know that a lot of Americans, a lot of people get their care at FQHCs. However, they're often not included in research because research is often conducted in academic medical centers. We also thought about rural America and places that took care of people that are part of populations who've been historically underrepresented in biomedical research. There's growing qualitative data that exists that although it's true that there is justified medical mistrust when it comes to certain populations discussing clinical trials, but that justified medical mistrust is not the biggest barrier to participating in clinical trials. The biggest barrier for populations historically underrepresented in clinical trials from participating is access and awareness. They often get their care in community centers where there's no clinical trial being conducted, or that primary care doctor has so many other things to deal with that that participant or patient's never been offered a clinical trial. So we want to really level set this conversation of where the role of justified medical mistrust sits and where this concept of access, education, awareness sits. And I show this slide to say that this is an example of how we've tried to ensure that most people have access to enroll in the All of Us research program. Today, our goal is to enroll over 1 million participants who represent populations who've been historically underrepresented in biomedical research. And unlike some research programs where you're trying to see if drug A differs than drug B, or if intervention A is better than intervention B, we're looking to collect data from 1 million or more people and to make that data readily available to researchers, but also to ensure that that data that is available to researchers has been informed, that use has been informed by participants as partners. And today we've collected enrolled over 800,000 participants and have electronic health record information from over 400,000 participants, biosamples from over 500,000, and then participants who have completed the initial steps over about almost 600,000 participants to date. And you'll see this highlights where we've enrolled our participants. And I also want to point out what happens when you do effective community engagement. When effective community engagement is done, you will see results that demonstrate that that engagement has happened. So the bottom pie chart shows that most genomic studies where we're getting these polygenic risk scores from, where we're getting all this amazing science happening, most of that science is built on populations who don't look like the rest of the US. So 94% of other genomic studies have participants who are from European or white ancestry. Whereas through participant engagement, site engagement, and rural engagement, we now have over 46% of our participants in the All of Us research program are underrepresented by self-reported race ethnicity, where we have over about 20% of our participants 16% of our participants, who self-identify as Black or African American, about 17% as Hispanic or Latino, and you'll see other. We even collect information around Middle Eastern, Northern African metadata, because why do we collect information? Because when we were doing our community engagement listening sessions, populations let us know that we need to be seen in this research. Now, I do want to highlight that one category that you do not see on this slide right now is American Indian Alaska Native data. And that is also because of community engagement, because we know that that data will be presented and those numbers will be presented, but we had to go through a series of listening sessions and tribal engagement to make sure that we're doing that the right way and how we will classify and present that data. So that hopefully that will be coming out in the fall of this year. But I also want to highlight other areas of intersectionality. We heard that word earlier today, right? And so people don't show up as a monolith. We don't just show up in my identity. We come to the table with many different identities. And so it's so important to make sure that we include and underrepresented populations. So 1 in 4 of our participants is from an underrepresented group. 1 in 5 of our participants is living with a disability. And over half of our participants are born female at birth. This is important, and also 1 in 4 of our participants are greater than 65. Why is this important? Because again, these are populations who've been historically underrepresented in biomedical research. Another thing that I used to tell my students is that another measure of true community engagement and listening to your participants is that you must do something different based on what you heard. If you're not doing anything different based on what you've heard from either participant or the community, that's not necessarily true engagement. It's definitely not engaging participants as partners. Something has to change. So that was often a difficult concept to convey to research students because they would have these rigorous protocols and they would say, Kareem, well, Dr. Watson, how can I be so nimble? The community said that they wanted this. I said, it's called an IRB amendment. That's what the IRB is there for. It's there to amend your study, to amend your protocol. There's ways that you can incorporate what you hear from the community to be nimble to that. For example, we collect social determinants of health data in the All of Us research program. We collect over 27 questions on SDOH. It was through participant partners that who engaged with Dr. Cheryl Clark that said, we want to change the way you're asking about religion and spirituality. Because at first we used a validated survey and asked it in a very simple way. They said, no, we actually want 2 questions in here about that. And because it's important to understand how where we live, where we play, what we believe, where we worship, how that and our spirituality, it has outcomes in our health outcomes. So our social determinants of health questionnaire was changed as a result of that. We also collect data, a wide variety of data, not just survey data and biological data, but we collect Fitbit data as well. And that wearable data was such an important thing to hear from the participants because one of the things they said to us is make sure you're addressing the digital divide. And this was an issue for us. So because we know that most people who have a Fitbit come from a privileged lifestyle. So we made sure to partner with an organization that was able to give us Fitbits so we could give them to participants for free so that we could address this issue of access. Next, we adapted an ecological model to think about community engagement. And you'll see from these awardees on the right that the majority of our partners, we have over 18 national community engagement partners that help us operationalize this ecological model of engagement that talks about outreach and awareness, education and access, enrolling to engage, to enroll and retain, participants as partners, the purpose of me being here today, and knowledge mobilization. Again, moving beyond this concept of dissemination, publication, but truly mobilizing knowledge. And our 18 partners help us do that. And I'll end with talking about a way in how we operationalize that. These are examples of how our partners, our national community engagement partners, along with our participants, have helped us operationalize this ecological approach to engagement. The National Baptist Convention USA, because we know that faith-based partners are still a very important community entity in certain communities. So National Baptist Convention USA is one of our national partners. They helped us to reach over 31,000 participants, 31,000 community members in faith-based institutions. And in 2023, they reached over nearly 20,000 community members. Through education and access, the University of Utah is helping us think about who are these teachers? How are we engaging science teachers? Thinking about the next generation of data scholars and data scientists to think about this work. And then enrollment and retention. The National Alliance for Hispanic Health has been an amazing partner for us. When our program launched, it launched in both English and Spanish. And that was in large part due to the voice of the National Alliance of Hispanic Health at the table with us. Next is participants as partners. We have over 45 participants from the All of Us research program that sit in various roles of governance throughout the program. And I'll highlight that for you in the next slide. And then lastly, knowledge mobilization. I just published an amazing paper on the work that I did in Chicago with barbers and citizen scientists. My family did not read that paper, but seriously, real talk, that happened. I went to the family chat, but I guarantee you if I had put that work in Essence Magazine, where my sisters read, or put that work in some other venue, we would have mobilized knowledge and my sisters would know more about the changing landscape of when certain populations should be screened for colorectal cancer. But so we have to think beyond this concept of publication and even research talks when it comes to knowledge mobilization. And Dr. Liz Cohen through the Ignite program is helping us do that. She has what's called data sandboxes, where she takes our data and presents them to community members and said, this is what the All of Us research program has found about condition X. What does this mean to you? What research questions do you want to see asked as a result of this? These data sandboxes happen throughout 8 communities across the US, and we hope to continue those. And here's an example of our governance structure. You can learn more about our participants as governance partners through these 2 QR codes. This is a story of Ray Charles, one of our participants who was a strong advocate for the program's planning and training of staff. Ray was instrumental in making sure that we had staff that were trained and ready to receive participants in a way that was not a turnoff, right? Ray talked a lot about what are you doing to make sure that the staff is ready to go over the consent form with us? If it may take longer than 30 minutes or 45 minutes, is the staff training. So we had a participant at the table helping us with that training. And as you can see here, from being a part of our advisory committees, to our IRBs, to our survey development, even to how we think about how we disseminate our findings, we have participants and partners at each of those stages. And this work is actually funded through an Engagement Core Award through Dr. Consuelo Wilkins at Vanderbilt University that helps us to oversee this work. We even have co-chairs. We recently launched ancillary studies, and from those ancillary studies, that's going to be studies that come and ask different questions from our data. We have participants helping us to say, this is the type of ancillary study we want to see asked. This is what's important to us. And I'll end with some work that I was doing in Macon County on community return of value. We did a survey of over 22,000 participants in the All of Us research program, because this concept of return of value was Dr. Brothers, it was tough for me because I kept asking the program, whose value? We keep saying return of value, but who has said this is valuable? What have the participants said is value to us? Getting this information back alone may not be valuable. So we have both the return of value information, which is return of data, but through community listening sessions, we found out that you can't just return even actionable findings, right? We can't just return actionable findings without connecting those participants to additional resources. So every participant in the All of Us research program who gets an actionable finding has the opportunity to meet with a genetic counselor for free. And I know that because I'm a participant in the program. So when I got my genetic information back, I was no longer Dr. Watson, the cancer disparities researcher. I was Kareem Watson, the son of Tommy Watson, who died from colorectal cancer, and the brother of Wayne Watson, who also died from colorectal cancer before the age of 60, excuse me. So I was scared when I got my results back because I wanted to make sure I didn't have a condition called Lynch syndrome. And I'm thankful that I had a genetic counselor to walk me through how I communicated not only my results to my other family members and children, but how I communicated those results to my primary care provider. That's what we learned. And I'll end with talking about the work in Macon County, where we went to Macon County, which is in Tuskegee, Alabama, to talk about the importance of addressing medical mistrust head on. And one of the things that we found out in our work with Macon County is that community engagement is not a destination, it's a journey. We are continuing to have conversations, continue to mobilize partners there and engage them. If I would have did this talk 2 weeks ago, I would have said that we co-developed this project with the community members in Macon County. But recently they said, Kareem, I don't know if y'all co-developed this with us. It was close, but it wasn't true co-development. You developed most of it and we had a lot of say in that. But 2 weeks ago, I would have said we co-developed this. But through that community discussion I had with them, they said, it was close to co-development, but it was not full co-development. They said, you can't co-develop via Zoom. You need to come down here. We need to see you more. We need to see you in the community more. So I'll be back in Macon County to hopefully co-develop this next round of this work. But I want to thank you all. I'm going to skip to these slides. I know we have less than a minute left talking about the return of value, but this is just the information that we return. But the key here to the returning information about hereditary risk findings, but also the medicine in your DNA report. And in this medicine in your DNA report, I want to highlight two of our community partners. Two of our community partners talked about when they got their medicine, their DNA results back, it was a game changer for them because they were able to go to their primary care doctor and say, if I were to have a stroke, if I were to have a cerebrovascular incident, I metabolize this particular drug differently. So you need to understand what dose I may need to get for that drug. They were able to have that conversation because of the medicine and DNA report they got back. Hugo Campos is one of our participant ambassadors who said, I'm going to read his quotes. He said, I wanted the genetic test done. I wanted to learn about genetics. I wanted access to genetic counselors so that to me, it was very valuable. That alone was my personal reason to join the All of Us research program. And again, this is information that we would have never got had we not engaged our participants as partners. I encourage you all to go and scan and learn about Michelle's story and the amazing work that she's done to make us be a program that is truly accountable to the participants we serve. Thank you all so much for your time. I look forward to questions.
Thanks, Kareem. I wasn't kidding when I said we had a great panel here. All these were fantastic talks. I will tell you, I've been writing questions the entire time. That's what I've been doing on my computer. I'll encourage everyone here in the audience to get up though and come to the microphones because you don't want to just hear me asking questions. I also know Tam is monitoring in the chats to make sure that we're going to get questions in from the audience that's on virtual. So please come up, ask your questions. While we're waiting, I will go ahead and launch in. So, if I can just say, I love the idea that community engagement is not a destination, it's a journey. That's a great quote, and I'm going to start using it, Kareem. So sorry, I've just stole that from you. But one of the things you talked about was that one of the barriers to having individuals participate in clinical trials is there isn't enough time or awareness or education for clinicians to be able to help inform. So what can be done to support a clinician's ability to inform their patients about opportunities to participate in clinical research?
Thank you for this. I think the same way we talk about co-developing these solutions with participants and with patients, we have to co-develop it with clinicians that are not clinician scientists, that are not the researchers. So we partnered with the NMA, the National Medical Association, and we said, how can we make research not invasive to your work? And they talked about ways that we could better utilize community health workers, ways that we could better utilize medical students, ways to utilize the waiting room to educate participants about it, and then making sure that we communicate to primary care providers in user-friendly language what we're doing in the All of Us research program. Members of the National Medical Association were very clear. They said, Kareem, the last thing you want is for one of our patients to come to us and we have a trusted relationship with that patient. That patient comes to us with this consent form from All of Us and says, I was asked to be a part of this study. Do you know about it? Should I participate? She said, right now, I'm going to say probably not because I don't know about it. So we did a series of provider education as well, provider workshops where he's providing CME, partnering in that way. So the similar way that we partner with participants and community, you have to partner with providers in a way as well. And when I say providers, I'm not talking about providers that are researchers that are rolling their sleeves. I'm talking about those providers that say, I don't want to necessarily do research, but I know my patients one day might be a part of it.
Fantastic. Just, these are open questions, so if anybody else wants to add in, please. I think the idea is to give take-home lessons to everyone here. Learn from what you guys are doing.
Yeah, we've asked our community of patients why they're not participating in clinical trials because we've realized there's a lot of resistance. And similar to Kareem, what we learned is they do want to participate. They're not getting the information. They want to be actively involved in determining what endpoints matter to them. So it's not just clinician, investigator determined endpoints, but it's what patients prioritize. And they want to be actively involved in understanding how to make a consent. I think this consent form issue is something that's really important for us to address because the minute they see that 50-page consent form before participating in a clinical trial, they're just stumped. So we need to do education about what happens during a clinical trial at all phases. What happens, they asked us, what happens if I develop an adverse event during the clinical trial? What happens if I'm underinsured and from an underrepresented community, I take the medication, the clinical trial closes, I don't have access to that same medication and I'm doing well on that medication. What is the extension period of a clinical trial? So these are the things that we need to educate our patients on in order to invite more participation in clinical trials.
Just to expand on that one last point though. So, I think you're right. People come in, they see these really long informed consent forms. It's something that the community has been sort of pushing back on for a long time. How much more do we throw into consent? Is it meaningful anymore? So I'll throw the question out. How do we actually move towards a new modality of informed consent that improves understanding, improves retention of that information that we're trying to get across?
So one of the things that we've done is participatory work, right? So you participate in creating the consent. So we gather together or convene a patient advisory board along with the investigators. And then we also break up the consent in chunks so that you're not reading a 50-page document. You're breaking up the consent. You can deliver it either in an animated way. You can deliver it in plain text. You can deliver it as a quiz so that it's interactive and so that you gather information from the patient about what they're understanding and what they need more information on. What you don't do is what we've learned from the patient community is give the patient a document and say, here, this is, go read it. Let us know if you have any questions because it's not going to happen and it's not going to work that way.
Tim.
First of all, it's
That is not working.
It's working.
Yes. Perfect.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for the great presentations. And we have a questions actually from a former panelist, Dr. Quarles. Great presentation, Dr. Watson. I am curious if you receive any pushback from the academic centers about following the advice and input from your community partners.
Yes, I did receive pushback from some academic centers, and I had to own what part of that pushback was our fault too, meaning it was our fault in the program. For example, we're, I don't, the downstream of effective engagement is not enrollment. And that's really interesting because there's a difference between community engagement and recruitment. The downstream of effective recruitment is enrollment. But if you want to engage a particular population, they may not enroll. That's a hard sell to a site who's getting funded to enroll participants. So when I go to those sites and talking about what true community engagement is, and they say, wait, you're a cohort building program, so we have to enroll 1 million or more participants, but then you want me to do this engagement. And I say, yes. And I'm going to help you do that engagement and provide resources for that engagement. So yes, we got pushback, but we have to do it.
Please introduce yourself.
Oh my gosh. Hi, I'm Caitlin Esposito. I work with the Bobby Jones Carrie and Springer Mahalia Foundation. And I apologize in advance because it sounds like you walked away from it, but I do want to go back to the consent situation. So as far as returning value, like research value, is that something you are as a practice including in your initial consent? Or is it something like you talked about high and low validity and relevance? Is that something you would like identify in the initial consent conversation? Or I would argue, is this something that maybe we kind of move towards just like an ongoing, I mean, it is an ongoing process, but really more strategically and systematically so we do consent, especially with data sharing. It's something we have to constantly iterate. So I wonder just, I guess, your ideas about where we go with informed consent in the future.
It's a really wonderful question. So over time, as we've been sort of like figuring out how does a research enterprise get results back to participants, lots of things have been tried. And if someone comes to me and says, hey, I've got some information for you about BRCA1. Do you want to know that information? I'm going to say, hell yeah, you better tell me, right? You have something about me, you better tell me. So I think that, one way to do this is to say at the beginning, are you going to want this? Because if you ask it at the beginning, then you can just not even look, right? That way it's not a situation where I know something and you know that I know it, but I'm not going to tell you, right? Because then it's sort of like, if at the beginning you decided, I don't really want to know my BRCA1 and 2 thing right now, maybe someday, but not now, then the fact that the study knows it or my healthcare provider knows it sort of takes away my opportunity to choose, right? Because now I'm like, okay, well, now I've got to find out. So there is an advantage to doing that. But doing that at sort of the level of granularity that lets people sort of get what they want is very difficult. So there are a lot of studies that use sort of, hey, there's this group of things we will be willing to tell you. Do you want it? Yes or no, right? Instead of like a one at a time thing. The other way of doing it is sort of having these portals that sort of give people a chance to sort of click into things or not to click into things, right? And then you're sort of creating this ongoing opportunity for people to choose what they want to look at and what they don't want to look at. And again, that does have the drawback that you know it's there. So can you resist looking? But the advantage of that is that maybe I'm not ready now, but maybe I'm ready later. And so I'm not sort of locking myself into a decision. So yeah, and I think folks up here can talk about what they actually do. So yeah, I think there's justifications for doing it different ways depending on the situation.
And I'll just throw in, just from a regulatory standpoint, the revised common rule does actually require in the informed consent document a notation if you were planning to return information. So that is one of the new changes from the 2018 revisions. But we'll go to the questions. Richard.
Yeah, thank you all. Really wonderful presentations, very thoughtful, and things to consider. My question is, as a person that works for a federal agency and we fund research, what are your thoughts, and this is, for anyone, your thoughts in terms of when you're dealing with community engagement, the fact that if you're funded by the NIH, how you communicate or engage your communities when you're representing an agency that where there may be standing mistrust versus trying to build your engagement. And also if you have comments, if anyone has comments in terms of representing a pharmaceutical agency versus the federal government. What are your thoughts on that?
And again, represent another federal agency. That's why I highlight the work that we did in Macon County. As a chief engagement officer, I oversee the return of value. As I could not have a conversation about return of value and know the atrocities that happened in Macon County with the United States Public Health Service study of untreated syphilis in the African-American male. I even call it by the full name because saying the name lets you see the history of that study, the United States Public Health Service study. So I couldn't come in as an NIH federal employee and not acknowledge who funded that study. And so it was through this conversation, this transparent conversation, that we had to become more trustworthy as an organization. So just naming that piece of it was one of the things that helped us, and then understanding how we could use the resources that we had to build capacity and to leverage sustained conversations that are taking place. And so we still have conversations that are taking place right now through organizations that are funded by partners like Delta Research Education Foundation, which is the not-for-profit arm of the second oldest sorority, African-American sorority in the country. So doing creative things like that, where the conversation can happen, continuously happen, is one of the things that we've tried to do creatively.
Yeah, and it's such a good question. And we work with the industry as well, so pharmaceutical companies. And we've realized there's a lot of erosion of trust. And part of our task is also to rebuild trust in institutions. So, I'd see what it takes is years and years of work, really. As a patient advocacy organization, we're in a very unique position. So that position is what we leverage. So we're not endorsing any agency. We are not endorsing any company. What we have front and forward always is the interest of the patient. And that's what we've always communicated to the patient community throughout the years. And so based on that kind of, we know our patients individually, many of them. And so it's also word of mouth. When one patient testimonials are very powerful. So when one patient says to another patient, hey, I'm taking part in this research study, it's really good, the investigators are really walking us hand in hand, there is, again, a mobilization that happens in the community that is very organic. And so, during the pandemic, the CDC approached us and said, we need to communicate the urgency to take the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, for the chronic disease community. And so we worked with the CDC to put together a panel of experts, patients included, to talk about the vaccine, address the fears, address the myths, not hide any of those, of those fears, address them head on, and thereby build more and more trust.
Thanks. And just to add on, I think shining a light on the past misdeeds in the research and in the research community are necessary. I mean, we certainly can't sweep it under the rug, and we should not be doing that. We really need to say, look, this is what we did. Here's what we're doing to make sure it never happens again. And those are important things that we're doing. We've got a partnership, as Kareem's been working, I've also been leading a partnership with the Voices for Our Fathers Legacy Foundation, which are the descendants of the gentlemen who were experimented on in the USPHS study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male in Tuskegee and Macon County, Alabama. And I too also only ever say the entire name for the exact reason that Kareem actually mentioned. But it's important to make sure that we actually pull these up and say, oh, look, this is what happened out of this. And at least in that particular instance, I can point to it and say, look, that led to the passage of the National Research Act, which set in place the Belmont Commission, which then led to the Belmont Report, eventually to the Common Rule, and our setting for an ethical research enterprise for how we actually have individuals participating in research nowadays, to make sure that those things don't happen again. It makes sure that we are vigilant to make sure that they don't. So, and it's remembering it's those partnerships that are essential to make sure that we are held accountable. And it's something I mentioned at the very beginning. How do we make sure that the research enterprise is held accountable? And this is part of it. So this is going to be our last question because I was already given the end note.
All right, well, I apologize. It's really not a question, it's a comment about the consent
discussion we were having. So I'm part of the All of Us research. And thank you, Kareem, because the reason that I thought I was part of the All of Us research, you blew away. I now know why I'm part of the All of Us research, and maybe you can guess why. But the consent form was so easy. It was lengthy, very lengthy, but it was presented in a cartoon educational format. I had to take multiple tests, and I had to go back and take them and read the cartoon again when I got it incorrect. When I received constant, I was told that if you don't want the results, you can change your mind. At one time I said I did, and another time I said I didn't. I would get emails saying, hey, in 30 days, we're going to give you your results. You can still change your mind. And I compare that to, I was also in a clinical trial during COVID for the COVID vaccine. And I'm from Chicago. It was at the University of Chicago, and I drove down there, and it was a 50-page document that I didn't read, that I just signed. So I appreciated everything you're doing around the consent form. It really made it user-friendly.
And I have to thank the LC community for that consent form, the ethical, legal, and social implications. And there's a lot of policy work, and the community participants. There was almost a years of work around that consent form process, and community members said that you have to have this feedback loop and the test. And even in Macon County, when the consent form came up and some participants said it's too long, several community members set up and said, we are not going to let Kareem and that team shorten that consent form because we want the length, and they didn't want the time, but they wanted the way that it was user friendly. But there's always room for improvement. But I will say that a lot of work went into that because it was participant and user experience led development of that consent process. And I should say process and not the form.
Yes. Yeah, consent is a process. Just want to ask everyone to join me in thanking this great panel. This is phenomenal. Amir, Kyle, Kareem, Shilpa, thank you so much. And with that, we're going to move to the next session. I'm going to call up Katie Sale, who's going to lead you in the next iteration.
Good afternoon, everyone. Most of the time, people start out these sessions by telling you who they are, but I'm going to tell you who I'm not. I'm not Katie Sale. Katie had a little incident trying to get into the airport last night, and so she is not able to join us today, but she is joining us virtually, so she's not in the room. And I just want to turn it over to Katie for a second to say the words that she had planned to say had she been able to join us.
Yes, can everyone hear me?
You're on mute, Katie, I think.
Oops.
Katie, you're on mute.
Oh, hold on one. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. Good. Hi, everyone. I am Katie Sale, Executive Director of the American Brain Coalition, and I do apologize for not being with you in person today. My flight from Minneapolis was canceled due to that whole global technology outage earlier this week. And I guess Delta is still dealing with that. I think a few others are as well. So as it's really not easy for me to moderate this panel virtually, I am going to turn it over to Laura and Ashita to do so since they're both in person. However, before I do, I just want to briefly tell you a little bit about ABC and why I think I was asked to moderate this panel in the first place. ABC is an umbrella organization speaking with one voice for the brain. We bring together nonprofit organizations, both big and small, along with professional societies, academic institutions, and industry partners dedicated to the brain space. We also have a strong working relationship with government agencies, including NINDS. In late March, the National Academy's Neuroscience Forum, which ABC is a member of, conducted a workshop to explore AI in neuroscience research and discuss how neuroscientific discoveries have aided in the development and advancement of AI technologies. I was given the opportunity to moderate a session discussing how individuals with lived experience and the general public perceive AI and what they hope to see achieved with AI in the future. This session also considered how neuroscientists and AI engineers can collaborate to educate the public regarding AI and its use in research, clinical care, and general applications. The session was very well received, and the overall sentiment is that those with lived experience need to be at the table in every further discussion in this area. And as Dr. Koroshetz has been reiterating today, those with lived experience are essential to such conversations. And I'm thrilled that NINDS wanted to hold a session highlighting this important area. And with that, I will turn it back over to Laura to help set the stage for this panel.
Thank you so much, Katie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to talk to you about a topic that I couldn't be more excited about and more concerned about all at the same time. So my name is Laura Adams. I'm Senior Advisor at the National Academy of Medicine in the Science and Technology portfolio, and I lead the National Academy's AI Code of Conduct National Initiative, where we were looking to take what we now know are sort of a tsunami of principles, frameworks, and guidelines vis-a-vis AI, and talk about where are we in sort of, I would say, violent agreement, and where do we have gaps, and we actually need alignment in this. It doesn't help to have poor interoperability of governance if we're really looking to help, bring out the best in AI. So joining me today on the panel are my colleagues and friends, Dr. Maya Rockemore Cummings, who will be joining later. I'm taking a page out of Adam's book, which I think is, you have the bios, you can see what people's backgrounds are. So as each speaks, they may want to say a brief introductory comment, just like I made about my background, but I won't go into long introductions. Also, my colleague and friend, Dr. John Wilbanks, and then Dr. Rashida Das, all joining today to talk about the incredible topic of AI. My task on the panel today is to give you a bit of a background. It'll be incomplete. There isn't any question about it. The topic is vast. There's so many facets to it. And again, I think it holds enormous promise, but there's a lot to think about with AI. And I don't think you can turn one degree in any direction these days and not run into something that has AI associated with it. Anybody that wants to pitch a product, even a cough drop, says it was developed by AI. So we know that it's kind of sweeping the country now. And I want to talk about it a bit in the sense of our the landscape view of it, our NIH-funded project, the AI Code of Conduct, and why it was initiated. When we think about the promise of AI, there are 4 things that I think differentiate AI from any other digital advance that we've had in the past. It's a big question. What makes this different? Why is there such a fervor around it? Why is there so much concern? I think that there's 4 things that I notice, and there are many more. We could make an entire day out of describing why it's different. But the sheer speed with which it's evolving is astonishing. We see the generations of ChatGPT 3, ChatGPT 4, ChatGPT 4.0, soon to be out, ChatGPT 5, and each one is a quantum leap from the other one. These things are beyond our comprehension almost for how fast they're spreading, how many applications there are, and what they can do. So speed is one, the ability for it to be scaled. This isn't like having to buy a gigantic machine that would need to be installed and have all sorts of things. You can take an algorithm, they're quite portable from place to place to place. So the ability to scale these, you do need local governance, but the ability to scale it is one other thing that differentiates it. One of the third things about it, I think, is its sheer ubiquity. You will hear today about just a smattering of things that are affecting the neural population that we'll be talking about. And they're just a smattering. They're going to be for every of those specialists that each one of those patients see. AI is going to touch diagnostics, preventions, therapies, all of these different things in different ways. I think there's going to be actually no aspect of healthcare that AI will leave untouched, just none. So that idea that it's not going to be confined to a section of healthcare, it's going to be throughout healthcare. I absolutely believe it'll be the operational and clinical backbone of healthcare before we know it. So the 4th thing is its democratization. If you have one of these, you have one of the most powerful large language models in the world available at your fingertips, provided you're connected to the internet. Everyone has it in their hands now. The idea that this also is a democratization to data, to information like we've never seen. If we thought Google was the friend of the patient who could not get a correct diagnosis, hold on to your hats, because we've got something now that's really astonishing. But I want to also talk about the fact that all of these things that I just mentioned make it extremely difficult to govern and regulate. It is without question outpacing our capacity to govern it. We can't even get ahead of it to understand it fast enough to regulate it. One of the greatest concerns I know we have in the federal government around this is whether or not it'll stifle innovation. And I get that. When I heard Chuck Schumer Senator Schumer last summer talking about his principles that he came up with and his group developed, the first thing that he said is our North Star for all of this. And I was waiting for him to say the American people, and he actually said is innovation. And I could hear replete throughout that comment the idea that there is so much promise to this, that there's almost a compelling aim of let's not stop innovation at the borders or anywhere else. But we also have to understand that the threats don't stop at the borders or anywhere else. And there are threats associated. So I want to talk about the hope, the hype, the promise, and the peril in this landscape view of this. The hope, I think, are that we finally have a powerful tool that I think has the capability to solve some of our most vexing problems in healthcare. And I'm talking about the ones that our populations today that we're talking about, misdiagnosis and misdiagnosis, meaning it never gets diagnosed, the lack of a diagnosis. I was speaking at a conference with Zach Kohani from Harvard, and we had a patient representative there who was talking about her son going through agonizing years and years and years of just pain and spinal pain. Finally, she enters data into ChatGTP after no specialist could tell her what was wrong, and it's a tethered cord syndrome. And it didn't say, oh yeah, it's this. It said, you want to consider these things, but tethered cord was at the top of it. She raced to her pediatrician. They did the work on tethered cord. That was it. So I'm not saying that these things always come up with the right answer, but I think that it begins to help us with the problem that we've had for misdiagnosis. So clinical diagnosis is one of the huge, I say the hope. The other hope that I have for this is it'll do things for us that are across different patient populations, like medical error. This is near and dear to my heart because early in my practice in a small 35-bed rural hospital where I spent the first 7 years of my career, I sent a 7-year-old child down pre-op to the surgery area with a lethal dose of scopolamine on board. That was given to her from care that was intended to help, I can assure you. But I made that mistake and I got a call from the OR with them frantically asking me what I had given her pre-op because the child was seizing, going into a coma, and she was near death. I raced over to the medication area and saw that I'd given her 10 times overdose of the drug scopolamine. I knew that seizures, coma, and death. By the grace of God or the powers of the universe or whatever happened that day, they saved that child's life in that OR. And so I'll be forever grateful. So I think things like where we have opportunities to reduce, we haven't reached the goals by far. We've been working on it for 20 years. Read the article from To Err is Human, the recap after 20 years. How well have we done? Not well enough. I think that the other one that we all worry about if we want care is clinician burnout and overload, the cognitive overload. There's really tremendous promise there. The hype, we can hype things in technology like nobody's business. All of you probably remember Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth was on every major business, including Inc. and Forbes, and you name it, holding up her little capsule of blood that she said with the help of AI was going to diagnose any blood test known to man and be able to give you that blood test. She was actually tagged as the next Steve Jobs on the front of Inc. Some of you know now where Elizabeth Holmes is. She's in Bryan, Texas in the federal prison serving 11 years for defrauding her investors. So when we think about that, we can really, really hype. And again, if you tag anything with our product has AI involved, it's almost an instant seller now. So we're going right up the Gartner hype cycle slope to the, it's the peak of inflated expectations. And we have not reached the peak yet. And I can hear people also be the peak of inflated concerns or concerns maybe not inflated, but I'll hear people, one of the people in my neighborhood who's quite blunt said, hey, what are you nuts with this AI? Didn't you see the Terminator, you knucklehead? So, you know, they see, somebody will talk to me about how it's going to wipe out humanity. Some people will say people are going to be absolutely, these things are going to be smarter than humans. And then I'll have someone say, yeah, but you know, which humans, because might not be that big a deal. But there's all kinds of discussion and hype about what the damage it can do. I'm going to talk now about the promise and then slip into the peril because it can do damage. But the promise, particularly for the populations we're concerned with today, prevention, we're going to be able to do risk assessments and kinds of things where we now have volumes of data that we cannot comprehend and our analytic tools could not help us understand. We have that now with AI. It can consume volumes of data, make sense out of it, whether that's structured, unstructured data coming from multimodal video. It can come from text. It can come from pictures. It can come from just anywhere. It can come from ambient listening to conversations. Voice AI has astonishing capacity for diagnosis. It can hear plaque building up in arteries. So we've got this incredible opportunity coming out of diagnosis too. One of the things that we know about AI is it can see things that we can't. We were quite floored when the retinal fundus scans also reported out someone's sex assigned at birth. We have no idea how it can do it. We have no idea. Maybe someday we'll find out, but the point is it can see things we can't. So EEGs, EMGs, the kinds of tools that we need for the populations we're talking about, it can detect things that the human has no capacity to detect with just our sheer capabilities alone as humans. Treatment, drug discovery, John's going to talk about that, I'll bet. Protein folding, taking the development of drugs from years down to a couple of years, months maybe. It's really incredible what it's doing in drug discovery. Rehab, so things like AI-powered exoskeletons, VR, AR, all that kind of thing. And I'm thinking about the gamification of rehab. It's so exciting. That's all the promise and what we hope to see with that. The peril is very real. My biggest concern is always equity. And something as simple as pulse oximeters, which we used talk about ubiquity. They were everywhere during COVID-19. People were instructed to go to Walgreens and CVS and buy their own to keep tabs on theirs. Well, the problem was that those products were trained only on white skin. And so they had a tendency to read the skin of anyone with any melanin in their skin lower, and it gave their oxygenation rates as falsely high. So I'm quite convinced that people got sent home from ER saying, gee, looks your pulse ox level is pretty good. So just go home and monitor it. Go buy one of those at Walgreens, which by the way, had the same training data in it, white skin. Most of our research that's gone in to train our AI has been done on white males. So the smattering of you, the sampling of you that are in the audience, you're good. But for the rest of us, not good in terms of what AI has already been trained on. These tools that are out there and that are spreading like wildfire have been trained primarily on white males. So the little active involvement of patients with agency. And I don't mean the sort of let's involve a few people and invite a token here and you can sit in on our meetings and then we're going to, and I anytime, if I tell you my number one pet peeve, it's when somebody says, we're all patients. Not like that. And you aren't here with that hat on. You're here as a researcher or a caregiver, you know, you're here as some other. So we want authentic patient voices in this development. There's also a concern that I have around the corporatization of medicine, watching AI concentrate power in just a few hands. I think we're going to have to keep our eye on that because that will affect us all. And then the last concern that I'll share is I was with Peter Lee from the head of research at Microsoft, and we were at a conference speaking on the same panel, and he mentioned that hospitals and health systems that have amassed treasure troves of data have not been able to monetize that data in the past. And he said, those days are over with AI. He said, you're sitting on a gold mine, an oil well. Well, I heard Michael Millinson say, if data is the new oil, then patient rights and privacy are climate change. So my feeling here is that I had one hospital call me not that long ago saying, Laura, it's an ethicist from that hospital saying, I'm not sure what to do. We got a call to sell all of our radiology data to an AI company that wants to use that data for training. We're strapped for cash, and I think we're going to do it. So it's a concern that I have around, again, there's a monetization theme here that I think we have to be aware of. So all of those things that I just mentioned for concern are, our AI code of conduct has been developed. Our paper came out on May 8th on the draft set of principles for that code of conduct, and more importantly, maybe the commitments, the 6 commitments. And the patient voice was all over that. In an organization that Dr. Cummings is going to tell you about in a moment, the Light Collective the voices from the patient are on our steering committee, and they're replete all the way through this. I'd like to think that maybe it was the most amplified patient voice for many initiatives at the National Academy of Medicine in some time, although many of these initiatives have wonderful patient voice representation. We had it throughout the project, and it's still going on. So I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Maya Rockmore Cummings for her remarks. Maya.
Thank you for that very insightful commentary. My name is Dr. Maya Rockmore Cummings, and I come at this from a background of working on policy, health policy, health equity, and to be exact, for more than 25 years. I'm currently a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University, and I continue to do research on patient rights and advocacy, and also the intersection of health and artificial intelligence. I was, in full disclosure, a Google Policy Fellow at one point in time. And so that is where I have gained some of my expertise in terms of technology. And I have worked for the past several years in collaboration with the Light Collective, and actually worked as a part of the collaborative that developed their patients' AI Bill of Rights. And so, the Light Collective is can I say kick ass on this group call? I don't know if that's inappropriate or not, but basically a group of strong women who are patient advocates, who are patients themselves. They're either survivors of major, breast cancer or other major health conditions, or previvors like myself. My mother died of stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. My younger sister had stage 2B breast cancer, and knowing that I was next, I went ahead and got a preventative double mastectomy. And so I consider myself a previvor with regards to this issue. But, the network that the Light Collective works with includes a lot of internet activists, advocates who are patient advocates who basically aggregate and network online through various websites that are focused on, and social media pages that are focused on disease states. And that is where they have networked and met up with other people who have sought to actually gain more power and information when it comes to their condition. And now the Light Collective is aggregating all of these voices across disease states to actually have basically, for a lack of a better term, I would just like to say it's like the AARP for patients' rights. Okay. So that being said, the collective AI rights for patients was recently released in June of 2024. And the bottom line is simple. The Light Collective and all of the participants in the development of this product basically argue that, AI must be designed for the end user, the ultimate end user in the minds of the Light Collective is the patient, then when we're talking about health tech. And so we must make sure that patients' voices, perspectives, insights, and certainly their preferences are basically represented at every stage of the development process, products, at every stage of the review process in terms of these large language models, and whether they're equitable and have the appropriate inputs and constraints with regards to, patients. And certainly that there is fair representations of patient community interests across the board. The ultimate aim is to establish a baseline for patient rights and remedies through their representation in the field of health AI. And, you know, the Light Collective has a saying, you know, nothing should be decided about us without us. And, you know, patients, they feel and we feel should be front and center. So with that, you know, we all know about the history of excluding patient voices when it comes to major developments and technological changes. And we want to go down that road again. We know that excluding patient representation has basically, you know, been a part of a troubling history, not just in this country, but around the world. That, you know, it creates a power dynamic where influential voices in healthcare tokenize and ignore the voices of fundamental problems. But literally, also undermines the ability of better patients and even after distinct disparities. Now, I should say this, that the Light Collective does not believe that AI is the fact with AI. Something that has not been mentioned is do believe that AI has a potential to actually reverse and even close health disparities. But we have to actually have a table who are actually pushing for these viewpoints, you know, patients' rights. The democracy healthcare, not just you know, the financial bottom line companies that develop these products. And especially Light Collective considered in the development of
Maya, would you mind turning your video off? You're breaking up, so we'd really like to hear what you have to say. Would you mind turning your video off?
Sure. No. That development of this product is how my health AI ensure equal benefit all while uphold patients' rights in the process. How might we build AI systems that align with patients' rights and interests? How do we create independent oversight and validation of health AI solutions which impact patient care? How can we build transparent and informed consent into uses of AI in healthcare designed for patients and by patients? And how might we build governance systems that center the perspectives, interests, and needs of the people and communities who are most impacted by AI? And so what ended up, we came up with basically seven major initiatives. We basically argued that patient-led governance and representation must be key. But since our lives are at stake, we must be key contributors in designing and developing the rules and standards for how AI is applied in healthcare and health technologies. And so, you know, it must mean that, you know, that we're co-creating the rules, we're co-designing the AI lifecycle, we have voting rights with regards to, you know, AI governance bodies. That is important for this endeavor. Number two, the independent duty to patients. So in order to adopt fair, safe, and equitable health AI, patient communities require representation that holds legally enforceable and independent duty of loyalty to improve outcomes for patients. So that means that, you know, that patients must actually have, we actually believe that a legally binding duty to act in the best interest of patients. Three, it must be transparent. So we must be informed when our data is being used to train AI models, and informed when AI when AI is influencing care decisions. Currently, there's nothing in place to actually make sure there's transparency in the use of AI in the healthcare setting and beyond, or in health technology. So when AI is used to determine treatment, evidence should be provided. Four, self-determination. AI should be developed and used in a way that enables patients to exercise the fundamental right to make informed choices about their own healthcare. Five, identity, security, and privacy. AI should be designed for safety, security, and privacy to preserve patient well-being and identity. And six, right of action. Now, this is a big deal, which most companies don't want to hear. but patients must have the legal authority to prevent and rectify any harm caused by healthcare AI. And then 7, shared benefit. AI must first and foremost benefit and improve outcomes for those who are most at risk from its potential harms. So with that, I just want to say thank you for having us on this panel to discuss and provide an overview of this Bill of Rights for patients. We encourage everyone, as you're doing your work, to think about how to center patients, and we hope that this document helps to add clarity for how to do so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maya. Now we have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Ishita Das on some of the opportunities and gaps in this arena.
Great. Thanks, Laura, and thank you, Maya, and thank you for having me here today. So I'm with the Milken Institute, and we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank. And within the Milken Institute, we have our philanthropy pillar. And our mission is to help guide philanthropic strategies and design and facilitate programs to foster collaborative and better, more equitable world for everyone. And I specifically work in our Science Philanthropy Accelerator for research and collaboration. And we help to guide philanthropists, foundations, nonprofit organizations in their giving strategies within the biomedical ecosystem. And this includes us kind of doing a landscape of different fields that different foundations and philanthropists are interested in. We also help convene a wide range of stakeholders, including scientists, clinicians, patient communities, and funders who can advance a vision that our partners are interested in. And in the spring of 2023, so about, a little over a year ago, we started to work with a new family foundation that was interested in AI and health. So very broad topic. And to give you a little bit of a background of what our Science Philanthropy Accelerator works on, we have different portfolios in neuroscience and mental health and oncology and rare disease and immunology. And this AI and health topic clearly is important for all diseases across the whole ecosystem. And so we kind of dove in to do a landscape specifically looking at what are the challenges that scientists and clinicians are experiencing and what are the opportunities for philanthropy to play a key role in helping drive this whole revolution forward in a safe and equitable way. And so that is one of the partners that we're working with. It's their New Family Foundation, like I mentioned, the Biswas Family Foundation. We have another partner that we are also then kind of subsequently, they came to us, and this is the 10,000 Brains Project, which is a new nonprofit philanthropic initiative that is specifically seeking to accelerate the use of AI in the fight against neurodegenerative diseases. And so we started our project with them, kind of doing a similar landscaping of the field. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And around the same time, we started partnering with the Boroughs Welcome Fund, who is interested in identifying opportunities for philanthropic support for health equity and how do we drive the integration of health equity and communities into the whole kind of basic science to clinical care spectrum. And so these 3 partnerships that we currently have engagements with are kind of coalescing around the ideas that have been discussed throughout today of not just new technology and how AI is being integrated into science and research and care, but also how are we doing it with patient voices, with lived experience, with communities at the center. And from our perspective, we really think about where can philanthropy play a role as a different type of funder and what can philanthropy do differently that industry isn't able to do and the government isn't able to do. So today I'll be focusing on outlining some of those challenges and gaps and opportunities that we've seen throughout these different partnerships and really focusing on the ones that affect how patients and communities are integrated into the development of AI tools to advance health. So one of the big opportunity areas we saw is that there's a need to expand the implementation of computational tools like AI for clinical application. So a lot of these tools are being developed, and in order to actually deploy them into the clinic, a lot of things need to happen. So there are a lack of systemic efforts that are focused on facilitating the safe implementation and deployment of these tools. We need to figure out how to reduce bias and enhance transparency of how the tools are even being developed, and patients need to be a key part of that. We also need to fund more rigorous evaluation and validation studies. Those are kind of not really being funded at all right now. And again, patients need to be integrated into that as well. And then finally, Laura mentioned a lot of the regulation and governance challenges around this, especially as these tools are advancing so quickly. So another large opportunity area that we found was supporting the development and the training of both the diverse and interdisciplinary workforce that's going to be needed for this field. So in the previous panel, Amir mentioned this work is multidisciplinary, and we need to train folks to work in that interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach. And so investments in individuals who are computer scientists and biologists and ethicists and social scientists, and getting them to actually learn how to work together, how to have a shared language is going to be key in order to develop these AI tools that are going to actually affect patients at the end of the day. And then the diversity aspect of the workforce is something I also wanted to focus on. A key part of developing these AI tools with communities is that the researchers need to look like the communities. The people need to have some sense of kind of recognizing themselves in the research. And so it's also important to make sure that the people doing the research at universities are representative of the whole population. And so there's a lot of work that can be done in making sure we have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workforce, specifically for computer science and biology, but also developing that interdisciplinary piece. And one place we found where there needs to be a lot more investment is investing in HBCUs and other minority serving institutions, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges and universities. There's like a wealth of talent at these places, but investments are needed to make sure that topics like computer science and bioinformatics are actually being invested in, or else it's a lot of the more kind of traditionally, R1 institutions that are getting a lot of that funding. And we need to make sure that everybody who wants to do research in this has the opportunity to do that. And philanthropy can play a key role there. We heard a lot about data in the last panel as well. There's so much data out there with from all the way from basic science data through what is collected in the clinic to where you live, wearables. There's a lot of opportunity to kind of improve these open data initiatives and put money into actually making the data complete, annotated, interoperable, because if the data is not complete, the tools that are going to be using it to develop different models and algorithms can't necessarily be trusted. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that space as well. And then we've also heard a lot about community-based participatory research. And I think as we've done a lot of our work in the health equity space, what we're seeing is in the development of AI tools specifically, people and communities recognize that these need to be like not even co-development, but kind of community forward-facing, community-led work. And Maya mentioned this in the rights that she was talking about. And I think you're getting a sense of engineers and computer scientists and scientists working together, like understanding the importance of having the communities and patients from the beginning in that whole process, or else you get to an algorithm at the end or a digital health, technology that the patient won't even use. And so having funding mechanisms that kind of incentivize that or even require that is a place where philanthropic organizations kind of play a key role to catalyze that type of a change in how research is done. So I think that was mostly everything I wanted to touch base on. Overall, there's clearly a recognition of the importance of having communities be key pieces of this AI and health revolution, but we need intentional strategies and kind of unique funding structures and funding mechanisms and we're in the space of helping philanthropic organizations find where they can play that unique role.
Thank you so much, Ashita. Now we get the opportunity to hear from John Wilbanks. I never miss an opportunity to hear from John Wilbanks. So I'm going to be with rapt attention to this. John, welcome.
Thanks, Laura. Can everybody hear me? Wave at me if you can hear me, Laura. Nice, thank you. So I'm sorry I'm not there today. It's great to see so many of my friends and colleagues, not just Laura to see you, but Kyle, Kareem, and Adam from the last panel. Clearly, I need to be there in person, and I'm sorry I'm not. So my assignment is to talk about getting the most out of AI with the current capabilities. And I'm going to focus on the current capabilities part because I think they're not actually what they've been hyped to be at the moment. You know, I read the Goldman Sachs report, which issued recently on ROI and generative AI, and I was fascinated that it continued to find a big gap between what is promised and what is delivered in terms of return on investment and value delivered. If you haven't seen it, it's available. It is a stunning document for an investment bank to release such a skeptical report on a technology that is drawing investment, right? I've never really seen anything quite like it. But the reality is the current capabilities do not represent the transformation that's been promised. And one of the more interesting feedback loops around that report is the difference between like the iPhone and mobile technologies, where there was a roadmap of value. The roadmap was published. The roadmap was achieved more or less on the time scale that it was predicted to be achieved, versus, you know, we're a couple of years into this. And as Laura noted, we're at the peak of the hype cycle. And if you go look at, you know, the new health AI thing that Arianna Huffington and Sam Altman have described, it's fuzzy. They can't tell you how it's going to be deployed. They can't tell you how it's going to help you. And there isn't a real roadmap for it like we had in mobile beyond, well, we just need more data and larger foundational models, and then it'll get better. Just wait. GPT-4, GPT-5, they're going to fix all the problems. And there's never a description of why. And so I think that it's one thing when you're dealing with this and it's Google or Microsoft, and it's okay that, you know, maybe it's okay that journalists are getting the wrong headlines for things and people have 7 fingers and all of that stuff. But the penalty for being wrong in this space is so high, right? That, you know, we haven't had the sort of, I think, the mathematical and scientific inquiry into AI's current capabilities to help us figure out, where is it useful? Where is it useful now? Where will it be useful in 2 years? Where will it be useful in 5 years? And I think there's a few places that at a generic level, I would hope that we would start to investigate scientifically. And so one of them is understanding the propagation of uncertainty, right? And in software, we talk about garbage in, garbage out, right? In AI, it's worse because it's like building skyscrapers on landfill in an earthquake zone, because we don't understand how uncertainty propagates through these things in a way that's really useful to it. And the current capabilities involve a lot of hallucinations, like the 7 fingers, right? And we need to understand those a little better before these things hit wide circulation, average people, right? Now, I want to caveat that, which is that if you're involved in rare disease and the current system doesn't serve you at all, hallucinations might actually be hypotheses. And so we need to understand, when is the penalty for giving you a wrong prediction because the token structure of the neural network predicted the wrong phrase or the wrong word? When can that be useful, and when would that hurt us as patients? I think these are the sorts of things that we talked about at the National Academies. I've heard them talked about in other cases. There's not a lot of consensus here, right? Now, inside drug discovery, where I've done some work around this as well, you know, most of the action is around predicting proteins and drug candidates and chemical structures. I can tell you from having been inside of pharma that we're not shy on drug candidates, right? That's actually not like the block. If you're an entrepreneur out there, that might not be the best place to deploy your efforts and time. But like making clinical trials work, 100% is the place where these kinds of systems, where machine learning and other things, the current capabilities can make things better. And this might not be generative AI, ChatGPT kinds of things. This might just be standard AI, machine learning, right? Can we derive polygenic risk scores or combinatorial risk scores that can go from 10,000 people enrolled in a study to 500 to 200, right? We talk about democratizing clinical trials. My favorite way to democratize a clinical trial is to reduce the cost of a phase 3 from $1 billion to 50 million. Because then running a phase 3 is suddenly in the hands of many more different people, business models, institutions, organizations. And that's inside the current capabilities of plain old machine learning and plain old AI, not generative. And so the more we can do to think about clinical trials in particular, in my opinion, the better we can do here. For those of you in the room, on the Zoom, right, thinking in a nonprofit and saying, well, what would I do specifically? What could I do like next month? How could I find a place where these kinds of systems can help me, right? It might be in clinical study. It might be someplace more simple. There's a lot of work that we do that requires repetitive motion by an expert. And those experts are expensive to hire and they don't like doing repetitive things. Those are great spots to look now, again, using current capabilities, right, in a way that's very, very specific to a roadmap, right, to ROI. And so the key is if you can find a place where you have an expert and it's hard to hire and they're expensive and they want to do more interesting work, that's a sore spot, which is a really good indicator to look for using ML or AI. And that's because, the people that I pay attention to focus on, does the domain space for the AI model use standardized grammar and ask repetitive questions? Because if it does, you're likely to minimize hallucinations and maximize short-term return on investment. So what are some places that you might deal with those things? Data management, data engineering, annotation, pipelining, processing. These are things that require informaticists who are experts and expensive and would much rather be writing papers than doing like data cleanup for you. These are the kinds of spaces where I think you can profitably and without a ton of risk start experimenting with AI if you're really interested in doing that. Similarly, clinical trial enrollment. Are you finding the right people? Do you have the right trial design? Do you have the right analytics that tell you, are you on or off track as you manage the clinical trial, where you might intervene in the study to do better? If it's a real world evidence study, could you target and figure out who might you follow up with for extra information, where you want to go get their MRIs or send them a patient reported outcome or get them on a wearable device, right? Those are places where pharma companies throw tons and tons of human beings with PhDs and MDs at the problem, but the grammar is standardized and the questions are repetitive. And there's a lot of room with the existing systems now that doesn't require magic and new models where I think you can do a lot. And as nonprofits who are often partnering with for-profits to do this kind of work, you can bring that kind of pressure. Now, why can you bring that kind of pressure? And I think Laura, I believe, is the one who said this earlier, although I think it was a theme from everyone so far in the panel, which is you, especially if you work with patients, hold the keys, right? The most valuable thing in AI is the data sets that become the training sets for these models, because the vast majority of the foundational models are trained on the same data sets. They're using the common crawl data set of the internet, right? They're using content scraped, maybe illegally from large publishers, right? But if you've got data about patients and biological ground truth, you have the keys. And so when you think about data, first of all, don't just give it away, right? Stop and think about it. Do work with your community and figure out what matters to them. And think about what you want people to consent to, right? Under what conditions will you share the data they consent to with those who are building AI? What conditions will you impose on those who are doing that building in return for providing data to them? What does not just return of value, but access and benefit sharing look like? We talk about the Convention on Biological Diversity is a great policy model here. The CBD dictates how indigenous tribes in the Amazon access and benefit the value that pharmaceutical companies create when compounds are extracted from the rainforest, right? That's the kind of regime we should be talking about if you're sitting there as a data holder. And then you need to think about, how do you put that into your clinical protocol? How do you put that into your consent? We heard about this on the last panel, right? Community impact in consent is going to affect whether or not you can do the kind of deals you want to do with your data with the AI world. And if you do a deal, be smart, right? Think very clearly about clear short-term ROI and focus on short-term value creation. Because if they can't give you short-term value, there's a very good chance they're not going to get to the long-term value. Think back again to the Goldman report, right? People bought long-term value with the first of these models, and institutions aren't seeing it. Some individuals are, but institutions, for the most part, aren't seeing it yet. And that's coming from a bank who profits on the investment that's made in the space. So last little bit, again, right? I've had to manage vendors in this space. Manage your vendors aggressively. Don't be shy. They work for you if you have the data. Again, I'm going to repeat this till I'm numb and you're numb. Make them explain their ROI in clear language, right? Not using complicated long sentences and nothing about the future, nothing fuzzy. Make them be clear. If you do a deal, make sure the contract is clear on IP, who owns it, when and where, under what terms, privacy, under what terms are you going to do privacy work here, and sustainability. How can those help you? And some last 3 thoughts, right? There's nothing wrong with joining up an existing effort like the Coalition on Health AI and some of the other projects so that you can get the power of the collective. There's nothing wrong with being third into the market, right? There's not a prize for being first in the market. And there's nothing wrong with sitting on your checkbook till stuff goes from pilot to product in the space, right? If you can't get the clear ROI, if you can't get the IP privacy and sustainability that you want, because there is so much investment in the space that someone's going to show up who's going to do the kind of deal that you want. And there's an awful lot of commodity in the math. What differentiates it's the training data. And so, you don't have to rush into this. The current capabilities are a little bit all over the place, and be really, really careful to make sure it's actually going to help you. Now, the good news is if you are one of these groups where you can get help, there's a lot of stuff that's free and you can use already. But right now, this to me feels a lot like the late web bubble, right? In 99, 2000, even 2001, before it really, really cracked and fell apart. And so this is one of those moments where, focus on getting your data ready and your consent and your protocols ready. And then the minute there's a clear ROI, you can race into the market and buy a product. Whereas right now, you're helping make the product by giving them your data. And so be really, really clear, really, really sharp, and don't be shy. Feel free to call me if I can help.
Wow, absolutely terrific. We have just 15 minutes left and we wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time for your questions. So while you are lining up at the microphone, which I hope you will do, I'm going to ask just one question of the panel. I had the opportunity to see e-patient Dave. Some of you know e-patient Dave, very outspoken patient advocate, was talking on a webcast webinar. And he said, we don't need any guardrails for AI. Dave's a friend of mine. So I quickly, hey, Dave, on the side, I'm a little bit concerned about this. And he escalated very quickly and said, don't try to put guardrails on this. We finally discerned that he thought I was attempting to put guardrails on patients being able to use ChatGPT. I was talking about all the other aspects associated with it. There is this sense that patients should have just unfettered use to it, which of course they do. Anybody talking about regulating and stopping people from using, that's, I don't know how you're going to do that. The horse is out of the barn on that one. Any thoughts on patients' use of large language models or AI just quickly before we start addressing the audience's questions? I mean, they have it. Any thoughts, John?
I wanted to wait. Maya, do you have any comments?
I mean, yeah, patients are using it just like they've used Google, just like they use Facebook and Instagram to connect with others and search for information. They are using generative AI to, research their own conditions or that of their family members. A couple of weeks ago, I went outside to my backyard to snip some herbs from my herb garden, and leaned in and something bit me and it flew off before I could see what it was. But my legs started swelling, and then within 24 hours it started burning, and I went into ChatGPT and I basically typed in my symptoms and I said, should I go to the doctor? And it said, hell yeah. They said, get to the doctor ASAP, because I was treating it like, okay, I just gotta a sting. And sure enough, I'm forgetting the name of the condition, but where it basically necrotizes your skin after you've had so basically it called that out. And then by the time I got to a physician to actually see me, then they verified that indeed that was the risk. So yeah, patients are using it. And so, yeah, I can see why e-patient Dave doesn't want to be constrained in the use of AI for his own condition. However, as we well know from what from what the Light Collective has developed, what we're talking about is guardrails around the mega guardrails around the use and the development of these large language models in ways that could potentially undermine the health and well-being of entire population groups.
Thank you, John.
So yeah, I mean, this is why I try to differentiate institutional benefit from individual benefit, because I think, especially for people who have a really rare illness. I have a friend who has an extremely rare cancer, the physician, the hallucinations are hypotheses because there's no literature, there's nothing known, right? It's unbelievably valuable for him, but I have a family member who has a cardiac condition, and it's actually not nearly as useful for her because the hallucinations take her off path, right? Whereas like the actual knowledge available in Google is the stuff that's better for her. And so I think it's, the more common the condition, the more we know about it, the more stable as it is, the more penalty you have for being wrong, right? And you see a lot of evidence of like historic racism in the models around cardiac disease in an interesting way, right? Where it's using old racist literature to tell that there's a difference in EGFR between Black and white people, right? When there isn't, right? Whereas so I think we need to understand sort of, that's part of the guardrails conversation, is context that says, hey, if you've got a rare illness, these things may be great. If you've got a pretty common condition, the penalty might be quite high. And so how do you help people know, like if they have an emergent condition and they can't get to a doctor like Maya just had, like it's really, really useful because it can give you that actionable information quickly. Yeah. Right. But it's the guardrails that the Light Collective is working on and how we build these things are really important. And we don't yet have the cultural norms that help us understand, like, when do you use it? I think most folks know now that when they type in an address in Google Maps and it sends them on dirt roads over the Rockies, that's not a great way to go. And Maps is caught up and doesn't make those suggestions. The hard part is we're depending on this stuff in real time while it's getting tested. And that's the hard part, right? Is that you're going to get great stories of individual benefit and great stories of individual screw ups. And we have to learn and just sort of be uncomfortable together as we work our way out through them.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of user beware. It reminded me of the MIT student, the Asian student who put a photograph into ChatGPT and asked it to make it more professional. It lightened her skin, hair, and eyes and rounded her eyes and made her white. So that was front page Boston Globe. Yes.
Laura, can I
Sure.
say I think some of what we're getting at is this idea of data literacy and AI literacy, and that's related to health literacy. And I think what's so challenging is that, like Laura mentioned, since these models and this technology is advancing so quickly that experts are even, struggling to keep up on the news, how do we then help the patients or communities learn in the same way? And I think that's going to be a continuous challenge that is going to need to be kind of embedded into any of the community focused research that we do.
You could introduce yourself, please.
I'm Penny Tax with AFTD. Thank you for a really fascinating session about a topic that I know I certainly don't understand at all. One of the things that I do worry about, though, both with these emergence of technologies as well as with just in general, say, digital tools to detect earliest onset of disease, is not what the clinicians, researchers, and patients are going to do with it. It's what the other industries are going to do with it who are not in these conferences, who are not disclosing their use of the data or their use or development of algorithms. If doctors can identify people at risk of dementia to get them into preventative trials, for example, I guarantee you insurance companies are going to be looking at similar types of data. You could argue the same for any disease that's out there. You could say somebody's pregnant. If these AI tools can detect gender, they can probably detect a heck of a lot of illnesses that those kids are going to be at risk of for families that may not even know themselves yet that they have these diseases. So, and I think it's relevant for, should patients or nonprofits be using ChatGPT? Well, where does that data go? And who is using that for what purposes that are not things that anybody is expecting or intending with all of the best intentions in the world? Are there any policies, things that are moving forward to try to protect against some of these other uses? I mean, I think of it like banks, right? Let's not have the bankers designing cybersecurity of banks. Let's bring in the hackers and design the cybersecurity of the banks.
Maya, do you want to make a I thought
Yeah,
you might
so,
make a point on that.
as you well know, there's high contestation when it comes to the issue of privacy, anti-discrimination, and AI technology and other technology. In the last Congress, there were several bills that were introduced. One that was seen as a viable bill where both Republicans and Democrats were coalescing around some of the details. And I'm actually forgetting the name of it. Let me pull it up while I'm talking. But it got tabled because, you know, the end of the congressional session was coming, and lobbyists who were against many of the aspects, including it included a private right of action for individuals, patients who wanted to sue if they found that a algorithm was used against them in a way that, you know, undercut their ability to do X, Y, and Z, or to, you know, that might have discriminated against them in some way. You know, conservative elements, but also private companies that was a sticking point for many. And basically it tanked. It did not move anywhere. There has been talk that it might come up again in this session. However, they are urging one of the original co-sponsors to take out the private right of action component, which is that's the linchpin. You know, if you don't have the right to challenge these companies for misusing, you know, the data and the algorithms in a way that harms you, then, you know, we might as well just all go home, because then there's no teeth to, you know, any legislation that's passed. So, you know, there is a delicate dance happening on Capitol Hill right now around these bills, around that one especially. Unfortunately, it looks like, you know, some of the heavy hitters, the big lobbyists, the moneyed lobbyists, are winning in terms of preventing it from being considered and passed.
I think one of the things we're seeing too is that some states are feeling this bit of federal inertia in regard to some of these. There hasn't been total federal inertia, believe me. There's been terrific action out of HHS, ONC, a number of different agencies, FDA work on this, but a lot of states are beginning to think about passing their own bills. I'm thinking back to when I built the Health Information Exchange in Rhode Island, where we were able to bring all the clinical data into one repository. And we built an ironclad privacy framework with the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, with the ACLU, who were the first ones to say, you think you're going to build what here? I didn't know what to do, so I just said, you're on the committee. So I just kept bringing all those voices in, and we built a really great privacy and security framework. Then we got ready to turn around and share data with the rest of the nation. And I found that every state had their own privacy framework. And we spent most of our grant money on attorneys trying to reconcile that. So I'm a little concerned that what we're seeing now are some states stepping into what they perceive to be the void and doing legislation of their own. If we end up with a patchwork of that, we're going to end up with, again, innovation stopping at the borders. We're also going to end up with the idea that some people are going to get access to these things and some aren't. And I'm really worried about geographic equity in terms of inner city Chicago hospitals, Mississippi Community Health Center, rural Nebraska hospitals. I think if we do some of these things, we're going to end up clamping some things down. So this is an example of why it's so hard to regulate. Excellent question. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Paul Gross. The CEO of the Cerebral Palsy Research Network, which is 33 centers across the United States. And I'm scared to ask this question, but I'm going to ask because I feel like I'm doing something wrong from listening to all of you. So I gather what to me feels like a large amount of data. Have over 10,000 patients in a registry have their electronic medical record, not their notes. So it's all de-identified data, or it's a limited data set. But before I do anything on it, it's effectively a de-identified data set. So I come out of computer science, but I've got a kid with CP. I think I'm doing good. I do involve the patient, the community in our work, but should I be governing more, just like building all sorts of models to look at imaging data, genetics data, clinical data, patient-reported data, all de-identified, but to generate predictive outcomes? I mean, I feel like I'm doing good, but I listen to it, I'm kind of going like, I have this data, it's all, and I have most of the data with a waiver of consent. So I'm feeling like I'm generating good, but I'm feeling like nobody knows that I'm doing this. I'm doing it with their de-identified data. So I don't know if when it crosses over into de-identified, if the rules change, but I just feel like I'm possibly treading into unethical ground.
Maya.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, another project I'm working on with the Light Collective is actually, we did a study, an anonymized study where we asked patient advocates about the scenarios in which they would feel okay with their data being used. And one which actually had a high rating is when data is used for research that is for the public good, for, health, for searching for health solutions, things that can serve the public better, the public health. So, the idea that you're sitting on a data set that if you ask the right questions and ran the right kinds of analyses, you might get some new and interesting and innovative connections that could make a difference in the lives of people. Or why not do it if you actually have access to the data and you've been given permission? That being said, what the Light Collective wants is the right of the patients to actually indicate if this is what they want in the terminology or the exchange for the agreement for use. So, to actually have the right to determine whether they want their data to be used in that way.
Do you
So
mean that
I'm glad that you actually have a
collectively?
data set that works.
Do you mean that collectively or individually? I
Collectively.
Okay,
To
I know it's
basically
the Light
have-
Collective, but I'm glad to hear that it's
Yeah.
collectively, because they don't know their data's there. So I really need to get a representative body that weighs in. So anyway, thank you.
It makes me
Thank you.
think that what John, you recommended earlier, that you all should be thinking A, B, C, D about the use of your data. This would be a great conversation to be having collectively among representatives of this group to develop sort of not a one size fits all, but a bit of a template and assist, a guide, a roadmap for how do you enter into this world, understanding the value of your data. How do you start to, one of the things that I'm seeing emerging on the horizon is the incredible value of public-private partnerships. We just cannot do this alone. We don't have the compute power. We don't have the technology in some areas. We don't have the execution capability, and they don't have your data. And so you are bringing, again, as John said, the gold, the oil. You're bringing one of the most valuable assets to this. And so it gives you leverage and power. If we think hospitals have it, you do too.
Well, and one quick point there, which is like, if you've got that kind of data set, especially imaging data, is really, really amenable to AI and machine learning. And if you can leverage that in a way that helps enrollment for CP studies, then like that feels good, right? That feels consistent with probably what you consented. If you're selling that to OpenAI and they're going to put it into ChatGPT and make it available to everybody and they make money off of it and it's available to the insurance and the advertising industries, that feels bad, right, to me. And so it's the sort of thing where, just check in. I would guess you've got some advisory committees, like, some people will tell you to put it to a vote, like, but to me, I would just sort of, we can go a long way with common sense, right? Like if you consented this data for research to make CP care and trials better, then that's probably within the boundaries of what the community consented to. But if, that's why I look at the deal. Are they going to be able to resell they're going to create nodes and edges, pieces of a graph using your data with weights of tokens, right? Can they sell that? Do you own those? If you do a joint model with them, do you own the joint model or do they? And those details are the ones that often lead to context collapse of patient communities, because it turns out that data is being, you sold it to them and they sold it to 25 other people because that's the only revenue they've got is reselling. And so that's the stuff where I would poke your community a little bit, but I think most of us, we have to be pragmatic. If the data has been collected and it's there to help drive CP care faster, and there's a deal on the table that does that doesn't create commercial or insurance or other kinds of risks, then that's a deal I would look at, right?
I think we have one final question because I think we're getting close to being.
Yes, no, thank you. This is an excellent session and definitely, I think a lot for us to think about here at the NIH and NINDS in terms of what type of guardrails we should consider and how we consider this on our research funding initiatives moving forward. But I have one question based upon, putting on my medical provider hat, just based upon this discussion. A lot of medicine is practiced based upon thinking about what am I missing with this diagnosis? And so a lot of tests are run in order to rule out some of the most serious things, which unfortunately adds to the cost of healthcare. I think with people, Googling things and coming up with diagnoses, I wonder what's the impact, or have you thought about the impact of how this is impacting healthcare, where people are now, which happens a lot, Googling things and then going back to the healthcare establishment and then may or may not be right, and how that impacts potential lawsuits, as well as how it sort of adds to the healthcare system moving forward. And is this the direction we have to go? Oftentimes, as a medical provider, some of the practice of what we do is sort of determining, okay, there may be a 50% chance, of 30% chance of developing something versus not. And you talk about sort of the risks and the benefits and all of those kinds of things. And I'm not sure how that's fashioned into making those types of decisions. But sort of how is this, or people thinking about in your space, thinking about how this is sort of impacting healthcare, and how it still will impact the actual person who's there, who is at risk for being sued, and all of those other things that go along with that. Hopefully that's a coherent question. Any thoughts?
I think there's some concern. The recent, I think it's 1552 out of OCR, the reg that came out that said essentially providers are accountable for if they use an algorithm and it's found to be discriminatory, they bear the responsibility for that. And I think that sent a bit of a shockwave around the provider community, because who knew with pulse oximeters, for example, who knew? And so this idea that I've got to be concerned about whether or not this has a discriminatory outcome. And again, I'm in rural Nebraska, where I'm in Mississippi, community health center. I'm I'm afraid to use these things. We've got a lot to sort out in terms of liability. And I think that we've got a lot to sort out on the front of who assumes some of it. In that same conversation where Peter Lee from Microsoft spoke, he said, I think eventually big tech is going to have to understand that we're going to have to share a bit in liability, because it's one thing to use a device that's presented and you bought it as is. It's another thing to use something that's constantly updated and you have no idea how that underlying algorithm is getting changed and whether it's drifting and going over here and doing that. That happens with large language models all the time. We don't know what's being changed. ChatGPT-4 isn't static, it's being changed. So I think there's this idea that we've got a whole lot to sort out in terms of what happens when someone's harmed, and someone's going to be harmed. Somebody already has been harmed in some of the cases. So this one is an area of grave concern when I speak to providers. I'm speaking to another spoke to a group just last week of Appalachian physicians. And that was one of the concerns on their mind, is we'd like to use these, but we don't get our socks suit off if something happens here that it was an untoward consequence we didn't know. So I think there is some concern about that right now. We've got to get that sort of sorted out pretty quickly because of the OCR ruling. Oh, I get a thing.
Yeah, but that's a great point. But I think also the other side, I think with now people, I'm going to use the term patients, sort of pushing providers now based upon the results that they get to potentially do certain tests and look things up, which also creates harm. But it's based upon something that they found online, and now that's pushing medical providers to do certain things.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the other side of that, based upon AI.
That's right. I think that's sort of Dr. Google 2.0, because we've kind of already been there when people come armed with their big reams of information that they got from Google saying, I think I have XYZ you know, tsetse fly this or that or something, and what you have is a mosquito biter, but you know, horses versus zebras is what I'm trying to say about that. So we are at the end, and so I'm going to ask Ashita to give us a closing few comments.
You. I think sorry. I think I wanted to end with just a short, maybe hopeful story. I think especially for this community, so many of you may know Steve Gleason, who is a former NFL player who was diagnosed with ALS, and I saw him speak maybe a couple months ago using an AI voice generated kind of tool. And I think the potential for using these types of tools to help folks with a wide range of diseases is there. It's just, how do we do it correctly and then make sure those treatments and tools and potential kind of preventative outcomes are available to everyone. And I think, I would encourage folks to kind of go look at those AI voice generated types of kind of tools that are coming out, because it is really inspiring, and having people out there willing to, going through the diseases that are hard to live with, but they're kind of taking ownership and coming up with different solutions so that they can thrive while living with these diseases is really important to highlight. So I just wanted to end with that.
Thank you very much. Help me thank the panelists. We have our poster session to move on to next, and so look forward to seeing you there.
If you didn't see the signs in the lobby, the poster session is just at the very end of the building. So just walk all the way that way and you'll run into the poster session.
I mean, I don't know.
Roll down too. Roll down.
Wait, no, I mean, I was just thinking of it, right?
Yeah, and I was up. So I. So it went from like a 5:30 arrival, 7 o'clock. My flight, it was due. My luggage is.
Okay, yeah.
Right, yeah.
They probably can't get them on. That's all.
Oh. Yeah, all my big stuff. Yes.
Nora is nice to meet you.
Yeah, that was.
I'm not asking everybody.
They did invite, I don't know if you were last year.
I mean.
You were.
So what do you know about it?
Yeah.
For example,
Wait
I
for-
mentioned at the group that,
Yeah.
reaching out to different.
No, that's why, I mean, yeah, I mean, we can leave it on the first one and
I
maybe
think
tell.
it's fine, and I mean, we are happy to be there, but also I don't think there's any downside. Yeah, both Nina